everyone, and welcome to Grace at the Table. We are so happy to have you join us for our next installment in our panel discussion series on kingdom and culture, where we hope to take topics we encounter in our daily lives and current culture and interpret and analyze them through Scripture in light of God's kingdom. We hope that you'll join us by interacting on today's topic by texting in your comments and questions live for us to interact with. The text number is 443-499-2611 and will be on your screen if you need to reference it later. All questions are sent to us completely anonymous, so feel free to ask any question no matter how crazy or embarrassing it may seem. We will never know it was you. We really want these times to be as interactive and helpful as possible for those watching, so please send in any questions you might have for us to add to our discussion. We are very excited to dig into this new topic with you all, so let's get started. Are we? All right, there's
yes,
my voice. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to Grace at the Table. I don't know if you heard the intro, so we're going to give it to you one more time. We are happy to have you join us for our next installment in our panel discussion series on kingdom and culture, where we hope to take topics we encounter in our daily lives and current culture and interpret and analyze them through Scripture in light of God's kingdom. We hope that you'll join us by interacting on today's topic by texting in your comments and questions live for us to interact with. The text number is 443-499-2611 and will be on your screen if you need to reference it later. All questions are sent to us completely anonymous, so feel free to ask any question, no matter how crazy or embarrassing it may seem, because we will never know it was you. We really want these times to be as interactive and helpful as possible for those watching, so please send in any questions you might have for us to add to our discussion. Today we are joined by three panelists, Don, Eric, and Brendan, who are all pastors here at Grace, and we are very excited to dig into this new topic with you guys. Now, additional disclaimer, we've said it before, but we're going to say it again just so everyone's clear at the beginning of this. This is more of a PG-13 topic. We will be talking about things involving sex, sexuality. The topic itself is homosexuality. So if you are listening at home, or if you are even in this room with little children, or even someone you don't feel comfortable having that conversation, now is your chance to leave, turn it off, pause, whatever you need to do.
Can I excuse myself?
You're going to leave. So this is your chance. We're giving you that warning so that you understand what's coming. Now that we've done that.
Oh, I think the other thing to warn here too is that we're really focused on the practical. We just got off a sermon talking all about this, what the Bible says about it.
Yeah.
So please go listen to that if you haven't. If you're interested more in the theological piece of it, Brendan just did a great job breaking that down just a minute ago.
Yeah.
So that's not attached to our Grace at the Table video, but that is attached to you can find our YouTube channel, website, etc., and then come back and listen to the practical pieces here.
Yeah, and if you're here for that, you realize that that sermon was an hour long, so this is why we moved all of the practical to this, because there's too much to talk about.
Yes.
So sorry for that.
No, that's fine. So we just want to make sure.
There's probably too much to talk about for this time.
Yes, we have to get all of our disclaimers and information out of the way, and just so we're clear, this is a time more on the practical side of things because we did already cover the other stuff, and also, due to the nature of this, we understand that it may run longer than an hour. Just so you know, heads up, we're okay with that. I'm just letting you know. So if you have questions.
Feel free to turn it off and leave, but we'll be here.
You can finish it later, but just know that we're going to go ahead and stick it out. We're going to make sure that we answer all the questions everyone sends in to the best of our ability. So, all right, we're going to dig right in.
Woo-hoo.
First question, yes, woot. The first question we have is, if you have same-sex desires, what would you say to someone who struggles with that or is finding themselves in that position? What can you affirm? What can you say that might involve correction? How would they even assess looking at themselves, knowing that's a struggle that goes on inside of them? Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, I'll kick us off if you're not too sick of hearing me talk about this after the sermon, but
go for it.
I think so. Because I'm going to be probably referring back to some ideas in that message. So yeah, like Eric said, go listen to that if you haven't. But I think I would say to them, there's probably lots of things to say, but the first and most important thing I want to say to them is the same thing I would say to anybody struggling with any kind of temptations to sin, any sort of sinful desires, is that Jesus is a savior for you. that you are not outside the reach of grace, that this is not disqualifying from salvation, and that in Christ, if Christ wants to be the center of your life, and will give you grace to follow him. And so, like, follow him.
Yeah, I might add to that. The first thing I would want to say is that struggling with desires is not sin. We all struggle with
You might need to
desires.
repeat that one. Let's say it again a little louder.
And struggling with desires is not sin. So I would first want to try to just relieve the guilt, if there's guilt about that struggle.
Yeah, I take mine back. Do what he said.
No, because while that can feel like, in our culture, a very, extra bad desire, it's really no different than any other sinful desire in a sense that we struggle with. So we all struggle with sinful desires. It's what we do with that. And I think that's where I think Brendan's answer is the second thing that I would want them to know, that God calls you, Jesus calls you to follow him in the midst of that struggle, and he will give you grace, to walk with him through that.
So what does it mean to follow Christ in that struggle? If you're saying, because I think a lot of people might think that means God needs to remove that temptation somehow from you. There can be a way where people can, I think, feel, especially in a Christian community, that means in some way they might be defective. It feels like they can't get on the right track of what would make life easier, how they're supposed to feel, think, live. So constantly feeling you're fighting to be, quote unquote, acceptable in this way, I think can lead to a lot of not just discouragement, but condemnation and just a lot of reflective feelings on yourself as you try to figure out how to proceed with that. So in a practical way, what does it look like to honor God amidst having that struggle? Because realistically, I don't know that it's fair to say it's necessarily going to get taken away, that it's just going to get lifted out of your life. A lot of other temptations we all deal with for other areas don't go that way either. So if it's still there and you're trying to move forward, what does it look like practically to try to honor the Lord while still having those wrestlings? How does one do that?
Yeah. Well, so one thing you said I think was a little illuminating. You said you can feel like this is the wrong track because it should be easier, or something. You said something like that, and so I think the hard and liberating truth for this issue and every other thing that we wrestle with in a fallen, broken world is that the right track is not easy. The right track is picking up your cross and following Jesus, and so it's going to be hard. And I think in some ways, I think the call to in every way, the call to discipleship for a gay person following Jesus is the same call of discipleship. It's take up your cross and follow him, deny yourself, because to lose the whole world and gain Jesus is better. I think that in this culture, that call of discipleship is really crystallized for a gay person as a really hard thing, because it really, like, you can see really clearly what it means to lay this down. I think for those of us who don't struggle with same-sex attraction, the call of discipleship is actually just as hard for us, but we might have been able to fool ourselves that it wasn't. But it's just as much of a pick up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me. It's just that this particular one just crystallized it. Like, here's the issue.
Yeah, and obviously I think that would go without saying is that'd be the same as any other sin we're dealing with, any other temptation we're dealing with. The same thing is, as you struggle with desire for idolatry, greed, whatever, it's the same idea in the sense of we still have to take up our cross daily, fight against that, and not give in to those temptations we're feeling and facing. But I think the other thing, not to just pass the buck on, there's some fantastic resources out there that are written by people who have these struggles that I think would be very enlightening for people. One of them Is God Anti-Gay by Sam Alberry. Fantastic read. He talks a lot about his struggle with that and his story, and very practical pieces of it. And there's another one, there's a great author out there, Rosaria Butterfield, does a great dive into this topic as well. Both of them have these struggles, have these things in real life, and it's things they deal with daily. And so they walk through, how do I go about dealing with this? How do I live as a Christian, honoring God while dealing with these struggles?
And just maybe to add a little bit of a different thought on this, but I think as people, as human beings in our kind of fallenness, there can be just areas of vulnerability in our lives that we can really wrestle with, and sometimes God changes those as time goes on, but sometimes there are things we wrestle with kind of throughout life, and they may be very different from one person to another. So, this could be an area that is kind of one of those ongoing wrestling things that we have to day by day trust the Lord for the grace and power to walk out a life of trying to follow Him. But there's a uniqueness to us as human beings, I think, where we're just different in what those struggles would be. I mean, I can relate to having a core struggle in my own life, that seems like it just is always there. And you just kind of naturally kind of wrestle with some of those things. So again, the struggle isn't a sin.
I want to go back for something you said briefly, real quick.
Uh-oh.
No, just terminology type stuff, because I think this is something that people can get tripped up on, and I want to see if we can put some light on that for a minute. So you said that you used the term a gay Christian, and I want to go back for that.
Yes, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I know in the Christian circle, terminology can be something that people are very protective of when it comes to certain things that are in the Bible. And I think, while that can be a good thing, there are times where I think it becomes you can't say that, you don't say that, that's not a real thing. Or like the phrasing of something, even in what you just said, might be seen as the abomination. So is it really is it accurate or biblical to get hung up on wording like that? Is it a biblical thing to say that there's such thing to own the title of gay or lesbian or whatever your title may be, and still put Christian on the back end of it as an identifier? Is that biblical to own both of those words in the same identifying sentence for yourself or somebody else?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So yeah, I think first, I'm really glad that you brought that up here at the beginning, because I think it would be important to define our terms.
Yeah.
And so I think anytime in this, rather than me make a blanket statement of yes, that's good, or no, that's bad, I would say, please, if you ever wonder, always ask someone to define their terms. What do you mean by that? Because there's the phrase gay Christian. There's probably there is a unhelpful and unbiblical thing that could mean, but there's also perhaps just a normal and biblical thing that can mean. So just what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
So what I meant by that is a Christian, meaning someone who follows Jesus, who experiences same-sex attraction.
Okay.
And so. So if in the context of this discussion, if I use the term gay Christian, that's what I mean, is someone who is seeking to follow Jesus while experiencing this desire, which, as Don pointed out, is not the desire itself is not sin. It's what you do with it. And so now the second part of your question is that an appropriate thing to identify as a Christian? Because if like I said in the message.
Well, if it was any other sin and I walked around and said, hey, I'm Lisa and I'm a liar or whatever, I mean, I wouldn't do that, right? We're not walking around identifying ourselves by any other label that's our conduct like that in many cases. I mean, maybe you are, maybe I could think of an example where there's an exception, but to walk around and put that forward as this is who I am, I mean, it does beg a question.
Yeah, so I think there's, so in there is perhaps that I have a caution and, and then maybe something to think about. The caution is, like I said in the message, is that our culture wants to put sexuality at the center of your identity. And that is where Jesus is like, no, I'm the center of your identity. And so you are no longer, when Paul says, such were some of you, is that this is no longer the defining characteristic of your life. So you are not so in that sense, you are not a gay Christian, you are a Christian. However, I think that there is an appropriate context that you can describe your struggles and be open and transparent about the things that you wrestle with and your weaknesses and the things that you're prone to be vulnerable in. And I think really at the foot of the cross, how much more should we all as Christians be like that? To be like, I follow Jesus. This is not my identity anymore, but here's the things I struggle with. Like, let's be free to say that.
Yeah.
So like, I try to be really upfront and clear about talking about my struggle with depression. So does that mean like I'm a depressed Christian? I guess.
Have you ever introduced yourself as such? Have you walked into a room and said, "Hi, I'm Brendan, and I'm a depressed Christian"? I mean, I would like to know if you've done it because I wasn't there for it, but I mean, maybe you have.
Starting to feel like meetings in our culture.
And I think that's so the point of, in some respects, is so many things, especially regarding sexuality, race, etc., that has become the defining piece of people's identity. And what Christ says is that the New Testament is that reality is that when we know Christ, that becomes the preeminent thing of our identity. And all those other things are things that are part of who we are in some respects, but it's not the thing that defines us.
Yeah.
But as you're saying, I think there's appropriate times that it can look at those things and say, it's helpful in this conversation to be able to define the term and say, hey, we're talking about people who have this struggle.
Yeah.
So,
Let me clarify the question then. Let me be very specific. There's a difference, in my mind at least, from what I'm asking, between admitting something, being able to recognize it and put it out there and say, this is just a part of my life. This is what I'm dealing with. This is where I am. That kind of vulnerable, humble honesty that we're looking for in all Christians for all of the stuff that we wrestle with. But what I'm talking about is the identifying label of putting that title across your existence as you internally do that for yourself and how you think of yourself and also how you present yourself and put that forward to other people.
Yeah, and that's and so that's where I think that I would definitely have some cautions of so if someone identifies as a gay Christian, again, I want to ask, what do you mean by that? I'm not going to assume that, you're claiming this is your identity, et cetera. And maybe I'd have some gentle pushback of, remember, this is not your identity. This isn't your struggle. It does not define you. Grace defines you. However, I'm not going to come down really hard and fast on that because I understand just language is what it is, and in our culture, our context, that's a shorthand of. So saying I'm a gay Christian might be a shorthand way of saying I am a follower of Jesus who experiences same-sex attraction, and you're not necessarily claiming that as an identity marker, which is why I go back to define your terms and ask.
Okay. But if you get the feeling from talking and maybe their answer to that question that it is more than just a descriptor of the wrestling that I have, would you say something to that person? I'm not saying in that situation. I mean, would have words to that individual who finds themselves there?
Yeah, my message that Jesus is the center, not this area of your identity.
Okay.
Yeah, I think really, this may sound like just messing with words, but I think decentralizing it is a key to really seeing it from the proper perspective that allows you to address it as an issue in your life more appropriately. If you centralize it, it becomes so big as to part of who you are that it almost, it just takes on a whole different way of how can I ever deal with this? This is who I am. And that's the lie, kind of, that the culture and I think the enemy wants people to believe that these are the things that identify us when they don't.
Okay. Next question. How do you help young people, so we're talking middle school, high school age, I think, for this question, who are identifying as being part of the LGBTQ plus community? We're broadening our scope here beyond just homosexuality, because I think some of this can get somewhat addressed together. It doesn't have to get pieced out bit by bit. And I know some people have questions that are broader than just homosexuality. So on a broader scale, how would you approach that?
I figure you'll take a lot of this since you are the youth guy. But I think that one of the things I think about is part of it is just having those conversations and talking through, okay, let's understand specifically, what are they thinking, what are they feeling, why are they defining that way? Or is it like, hey, I had a thought one time and therefore I must be this? Or is it like they're already deep dive into those things? So part of it is that let's understand exactly where they are first and then go from there. Have the conversations. Don't assume things, but just have the conversations and walk through those conversations with them.
Yeah, and I think this one reason that this is a particularly prominent issue in middle school and high schoolers is just simply because your teen years are where you're really searching for and forming your identity. And the loud voice from our culture is saying, this can be your identity. So I think, and then to go back to what Eric said is I want to have the conversation to understand why that is. But I think the answer to a teen kind of identifying with that or thinking about that or whatever is first and foremost is not even in what are you struggling with, and what are the temptations and desires you're experiencing. Mm-hmm. The central question is, will Jesus be your identity? Mm. And that's what I want teens to wrestle with. Will Jesus be my identity above and beyond and in and through everything else that I experience and struggle with? And if I can get that central, then then let's talk about your experience of same-sex attraction. Because what good is it to talk about being gay and you shouldn't do that or whatever if Jesus isn't the center to begin with? Then you're just putting band-aids on the problem of salvation.
Other thoughts? Nay? Okay. Now let's get more specific then. Okay. If your child, so not just young people, because that's a little broader, if it's your child and they decide that is the identifier, that they are gay, whatever other title you're going to put on there, how do you walk with them through that? What do you do? What is the appropriate response?
So are you saying my teen sits down and with me and comes out to
yes.
me? So you're saying what's the response there?
Yes, or even if it's not I am this, maybe they sit down and say, I think I am this, so I'm headed in that direction. Maybe it's not a definitive this, it's I need to explore this because I think this is what's happening. Either way, how would you respond to that as a parent?
I love you. Let's make sure that as parents we start there where grace starts with us, where our Father starts with us, as I love you, and from there, from that foundation, let's begin a dialogue of what this means. Go back again, what he said. And I'm willing to walk that dialogue out as long as it takes and wherever it leads.
So more questions and listening seems to be what you're.
Well, and dialogue isn't just asking questions; it's input too.
I think the balance here, especially for maybe the church, is the desire for caution balanced with the desire of love and letting you know that I don't want you to run away because we're not maybe in agreement at this point on this thing. So if you're trying to balance those two things because you feel both of them, and most likely as a parent I would imagine you would, you have a deep love for your child, but you also have a strong desire to warn them from things that you're concerned about that are not good for them, that would not be the best for them. So how do you practically balance those two things within a moment like that? And not just one moment, but continuous moments that occur around that issue.
Yeah, I think so. I'm probably going to start to sound like a broken record, so I'll have to have more people step in. Sex is not the center, Jesus is the main point of the message, and that's how I want to engage with anybody around this issue. And it's fill in the blank to whatever it's blank is not the center, Jesus is. And so my concern from my child who comes to me and tells me that they're gay is not first and foremost about what desires or actions they're doing. It's about, is Jesus going to be the center of your life? That's my desire for you as a parent. Are we as parents maybe willing to trust it, to have those ongoing conversations and speak truth and stuff, but are we willing to trust that if Jesus really has captured our kids' hearts, that he can work this out, that we don't have to micromanage this? Again, I want to speak truth, speak into my kids' lives, but I can trust God with my kids.
Other thoughts?
Most things run through my head, so trying to figure out, coalesce them into a decent thought. I think the biggest thing for me is just continue to pray that the Holy Spirit would work through those times. And the last thing I want to do is react in a way that's going to shut the door for a relationship to ever occur and have ongoing conversation. So I think it's one of the probably really easy things to do is react in a negative way.
Mm-hmm.
But in doing so, we're shutting off relationship, shutting off door for conversation. It's not a good thing. So trust in the Holy Spirit. Say, all right, God, I just need you to work through me these conversations and empower me to say the right things and ask the right questions and all those kind of things. Because I think goes back to ultimately the question of, do they know Jesus? Do they want to know Jesus? And do they want to have him at the center of their life? Because that has massive implications. Mm. If that's not a true reality in their life, then we can't expect them to act like a Christian would or believe the thing a Christian would if that's not the thing that's driving them and it's the center of their heart.
Other thoughts? No? You don't have to if you don't.
I don't know that I'd have too much to add. I think I would just say, kind of knowing what you have to work with and where your child is in terms of their spiritual kind of journey, so to speak, where they're at in that. Have they made a profession of Christ? Have they not? So kind of where I would begin, I guess, would be dependent on kind of where I would see them and how I would try to communicate. But I think the relationship thing is really important. And the only thing that I would kind of create a caution for parents, and we'd never want to do this, but at the same time, the reality is it's not that uncommon, is when our girls were small, as you might remember, one of my things that I would tell myself over and over again is parenting is not about you. It's not about how what my child is doing is affecting me. And I think in an area like this, we can feel how this is going to be seen, look, reflect on us, how it's going to inconvenience my life, how it affects my life, and we can respond out of that. And that's usually not a helpful way. So I think stepping back, kind of keeping what I call a vertical orientation, where I'm asking, Lord, this is your child. They don't belong to me. How can I reflect and represent you and your gospel to them in this moment? May not always make the right decision, but it'll help guide you, I think, if you can keep that. If I make it about me and you, we're not going to do well in that.
This is just good parenting advice. Yeah. Forget the topic of homosexuality.
True story. One thing I would add that I forgot to mention too is if your child comes out to you too, one of the best things you can do is thinking about where they are in that moment, thinking about the fact that this is something that is probably they believe is core to their identity, and they're trusting you with this information. So being able to just affirm like, hey, thank you for trusting me. Thank you for being able to talk to me about these things, even though I know it's probably hard. It's the reality of those moments is that this is a very large thing they're thinking about if it's something they want to sit down and talk to you about. So thanking them for saying, hey, thank you for trusting me in that process.
That's good. So, in the same thread of things, piecing questions together here. If you are observing like two friends, and I'm sticking with this in this line of young people, but this could apply to an older dynamic as well, but we're gonna lump it in here, who are the same sex, but it seems that in their relationship, even though it's supposedly a heterosexual relationship, that there's something in the behavior of it, the way that it's playing out, that's making some people uneasy or uncomfortable. It draws some level of concern or question. Now, this is a question somebody asked, so I can't clarify what is causing that, like a certain behavior or something like that, but just loosely, that's what we're going to work with. Is there an appropriate way to address that, and does it even need to be addressed?
The appropriate way is to ask, and if you don't have the kind of the relational credibility to ask, build that relational credibility before you ask.
Okay.
I guess, yeah.
Well, is this, and maybe I should clarify, for the age difference here, I don't know if that matters. And again, I'm not given an age. That's why I'm saying could be young people that you're observing this, could be an adult relationship that you're observing this. Does that change the way that you would approach it? I don't know.
I think in some respect what you said of just ask the questions and have the relational capital, to me that doesn't change no matter the age. It's you still want to be able to ask the questions rather than accusing. Because you come in accusation-wise, it's probably not going to go well.
Yeah, this is a universally applicable statement here is that love bears all things, believes all things, and hopes all things. And that means that love assumes the best about someone else unless proven wrong. And so that's an obligation on you as a Christian. So you do not have the right to assume negatively about somebody else based on what you see or observe or hear or whatever. Like you have to ask them. Like this is a requirement. So often like I have all these judgments and stuff. And so like, yeah, like you got to talk to them. And if you're not in the place that you can do that, then I have some questions about your heart and what you're observing and the effect that it's having on you.
Okay.
Yeah, I just maybe add one more thought on this. I think this is something that as Christians we often do not do a good job in. And what I mean by that is I think there are too many times when we might see things, whether it's something somebody else's kids are doing or whatever it might be, and because it's uncomfortable, we don't love that person enough to go and raise it, ask the question, whatever. We just kind of let it pass. And I don't think if we see something that we're concerned about in someone else's life and we don't go and humbly ask and see if there's something, that's an issue there, not judging, but out of care and concern for that person, we're really not loving them for their best. We're more concerned about ourselves. And I just think as Christians, we often don't do that well.
Yeah, and I think like, I don't know, in my experience, I might go so far as to say that 90% of the time that I have some concern, I see something that, oh my, and I've actually gone to ask the person about it, it was not what I thought it was. That I think our judgmental glasses, so to speak, are a lot thicker and poorer than we think they are.
Well, and I think in the worst case scenario is instead of going to talk to them, we go talk to somebody else and create a rumor.
Yes, please no, don't do that.
Yeah, that's not gonna help.
that is oftentimes where it's easier to do, and so we default to that, and then like that does so much more damage than even what it could be otherwise.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
And the only other thing I'd mention here too is if you have these questions and you're not sure, maybe we didn't answer the question correctly, please feel free to come talk to us. Like if it is a young person and they have to see two friends, like please come talk to Brendan or I or Don or anybody on the team. We'd be happy to have conversation with you further of understanding like, hey, how do we move forward in this situation? If you are concerned, like we'd love to work with you. If you're not sure what to do, like we'd love to talk with you about it.
Yeah. Now, just for clarity, because again, I don't know the details of this question, but I'm going to play devil's advocate here just because.
All
because
right, let's go.
So let's say that this is not as much I saw this and something I just decided to judge in my heart and just went, I think that's what this is. Say this is more something that you don't really want to get involved in, but for some reason there's what I'm going to call a check in your spirit, that something does not feel quite right, okay? And I'm going to play it further. Let's say you go to that person or those people and you ask them if there's something there and they kind of blow you off and just tell you no, but there's something about that still does not feel, you're not confident that they're being upfront with you fully, directly. And especially in an issue like this, it is possible that someone might not, just because you came and asked a question, that they want to share that with you. They might not feel comfortable to be that kind of honest with you, to give you that information, even if you did observe it. So say that's our situation. So I'm not saying that means this person is gay. What I'm saying is it still looks and feels a little off. You can't seem to get rid of that feeling in your spirit that something is not quite right, even though you don't want to put a label on what you think it is because you don't know. And you've tried to go to the person, but you're not feeling like they were quite honest with you. Something didn't feel right about that either. What next, if anything?
Well, I think to me, in the situation like that, if I've gone and tried to graciously raise the question and ask them, and if to say to them, maybe you can give some thought to this and see if there's anything you would see there. If they say, no, there's nothing there, no problem, you're wrong, for me, I have to kind of draw the line there. Unless there's some clear evidence of sin, then I don't know that I would feel I can take that further. So I can pray, I can ask God that if there is something there to bring it out in a way that, he might be able to address it the way he would want to. But I don't know that I can take that feeling or sense and act on that without, that there's something wrong, without evidence that there's something wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, sometimes that check in your spirit, that might be the gift of discernment. That also might be your judgmental glasses malfunctioning. And so you have to go with what God calls you to do there. And so, okay, pray, seek his wisdom, seek more clarity. And in the meantime, I don't think you have grounds to go farther with that person.
Well, and part of it in my mind is comforting in my own heart is knowing the fact that as much as I might care for them and whatever they might be going through, whether they are honest with me or not, God cares more, and God's the one that's ultimately going to deal with their spirit and deal with their heart in that process. And so as much as I might want to be an instrument in that process, I might not be the one that's supposed to be the instrument. And so you can try a relational build, and if not, you have to trust the Lord, saying, God, you can do what you want in that situation, and I have to trust you there.
I don't have to be the Holy Spirit here.
Yeah, and God often has a way of taking the things we hide away and bringing them out through some means that we don't always anticipate. So God has his ways of dealing with issues.
All right. Next question. This is more of a cultural angle, so we're going to shift gears a little bit. The Lego Group recently announced their first set dedicated to LGBTQ pride. There are several unique pieces in that set, and as a collector, this person is planning to purchase it. What are your thoughts on this issue in particular, and what are your thoughts on the broader issue of participation in commerce with a corporate world that is all in on celebrating the LGBTQ plus sexual ethic?
Dang, that's a really good question.
It's a long question, but it's very thorough. There you go.
Okay, not knowing anything about Legos.
Yeah, this could
other than
apply
they're fun
to
to
any
play with.
range of product, really, but this is a recent example, I think
Okay,
they've
so I'm
given
going to give
us.
like a specific what I can about the Lego thing, and then apply that to more broadly.
Okay.
So I have no idea. Like what does this mean? Is like rainbow colored like building blocks?
I believe it's a bunch of characters that are in the rainbow formation and come as a set that is probably has something on the box, if I was going to guess,
Okay.
about what the rainbow colors are
Yeah,
for.
so like,
Yeah.
I don't think that there's anything inherently dangerous or sinful about playing with rainbow colored Legos. Can we just, whatever, you can, maybe my question would be, and I don't know this at all, is this the kind of thing where like $1 from your purchase goes to support this organization or something? So if not, if it's just Lego, doing their corporate virtue signaling, like I don't care. If it's something that my participation in this is actually like financially supporting something, then that might be more of a wrestling of conscience of to what extent would my conscience allow me to participate in that? So the broader way I think about this is, I think is it 1 Corinthians or is it 2 Corinthians? We're going to get there in 1 Corinthians when Paul addresses the issue of meat sold in the marketplace. That's 1 Corinthians, right? I think that's like chapter 10. I think
Sounds familiar. It's somewhere in that
Pastor
New
Don
Testament.
Sharp, ladies and gentlemen.
Just to
Sad
confirm,
tale, right?
just to confirm, I've been sent a picture of the Lego set. So I would like to confirm it is a sequence of characters. I cannot tell the gender of all of the characters from the image. They are too tiny, but they are all the rainbow spectrum. So you've got everything in the rainbow completely across, full
sure.
color.
Like
Each character put together makes a rainbow.
Are you
beautiful.
That's
talking
what we
about
have.
food offering to idols?
Yes.
That's 1 Corinthians 8.
Hey, cool.
So we're coming there in a little bit.
We'll get there this summer. Okay, so I love this 1 Corinthians 8, because this is actually exactly the big issue that Paul addresses in 1 Corinthians 8, is that the Corinthians have this question. They're like, when I buy meat in the marketplace, that is in a real tangible way in first century Corinth, a participation in idolatry, because the meat would kind of be sacrificed to an idol, an offering or whatever, and then they go and then they sell it. So like, well, if I buy this, like in some real way, like I'm participating in this pagan practice. Like, can I do that? And it's really interesting how Paul answers that. He says basically, he's like, eat whatever you want in the marketplace. You don't have to raise any issue of conscience, because the earth is the Lord's and everything in it. Like, even this food offered to sacrifices, it all belongs to Jesus. Those rainbow Legos belong to Jesus. Every cup of Starbucks coffee, everything you buy at Target, whatever, it all belongs to Jesus. And so he's like, you can just like rest in that the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, and go and you don't have, it's like, don't worry about it. Now, I think in other places he kind of put some clarifications on there in issues of conscience, of like if this would trip your conscience up, and be like, if you really feel like this would be a participation in idolatry, then for you it is, and so don't do it. That's Romans 14.
And that's what I would echo, is the idea of, at the end of the day, it's a conscience issue where I'm not going to say a mandate has to be one way or the other for a believer to do X, Y, or Z. It's just like boycotting a company because they support X, Y, or Z. If you feel consciously led to do that, feel free to. But it's not a mandate for every Christian to go do that in that process.
Yeah, so like the way. So this is kind of me personally how I would parse that out. Like, so I don't care about Legos. Sorry, Lego question person. But I like Starbucks coffee. Okay. Starbucks is a notoriously affirming pro-LGBT company, and so the way I approach this is every coffee bean on the planet belongs to King Jesus. Amen, hallelujah. And so I will buy my Starbucks and I will enjoy my Starbucks. Now, if Starbucks came out with some rainbow cup and is like $1 of every purchase of this goes to support GLAAD or something, I might be like, yeah, just give me the regular macchiato. That's how I would navigate that. So that's kind of probably how I would navigate the Lego thing.
Okay. Would that include, I'm nitpicking here, any organizations that don't just support that community, but maybe seeks to just care for them in the negative, oppressive ways that people tend to treat them, as opposed to reinforcing their choice to live that way? Would you still feel that is not to be supported. And I don't know that
I don't
I've
understand
not.
the question. What do you?
So if it's not an organization that's going out and saying we encourage people to identify with this and we're like advocating for that.
Starbucks.
Yeah, but instead we're just trying to help the people that are experiencing some form of oppression from making this choice. Is
Okay,
that still wrong?
So this Starbucks cup money is not going to GLAAD. It's going to organizations that serve at-risk homeless gay teens.
Yes.
Like that kind of what you're saying?
Something like that. That's where I'm going.
Cool, I guess. I don't like I don't know anything about that organization. It's so hard to answer specifics, but like that might not. While me personally, that might not be something I would go out of my way to support. Of like, ooh, I'm gonna spend an extra $1 for that Lego set. I think organizations trying to help in like practical, tangible ways like that, that feels less problematic to me. But without any like specifics, I don't know what to say.
Yeah, I'm just trying to avoid the black and white of some of these decisions. It's the only reason I'm nitpicking here. I don't have a specific organization in mind when I ask this question, so I'm not like, support them and not these people. That's not what I mean. What I mean is, if you just look at every organization and say, oh, it has LGBTQ plus on it, it's out. It's bad. It's, we can't have anything to do with that. We can't support them. That may be potentially too black and white to be appropriate,
Yeah, remember
healthy.
what Paul said in 1 Corinthians 6. We saw it today. He says, when I wrote to you not to associate with sexually immoral people, I didn't at all mean the world, because then you'd have to go out of the world. If that's going to be your standard for participation in commerce, you're going to have to go live in a cave in the mountains
I was
somewhere.
just going to
This
say,
is
if you
the
did
world.
some digging, you're going to probably have difficulty with that, doing anything or buying anything from anyone at this point, because it's becoming extremely common that organizations would at least align with the values, even if they're not doing something actively to push it.
And I shouldn't expect anything else, but that's why I love 1 Corinthians 8. It's like it all belongs to Jesus anyway, so just go and live in the world.
You think about, a slight deviation, but you think about the reality of our world around us, the commerce around us. Every organization is going to do everything possible to market to whoever and possibly they can because they want to make their money. That's their bottom line, is the money. And so you have sports teams. They'll have a Christian faith night, an LGBT night, a dog night, a military night. They're doing whatever they can to market to whoever they can because they want to make their money. They're oftentimes, that's what their agenda is, not necessarily like, I want to make sure I support this thing. They just want to make their dollar.
Fair enough.
And so why would I expect people who are companies and people that are driven by non-Christian values to act like Christians?
You wouldn't, or you shouldn't, but wouldn't and shouldn't has never stopped anybody. That's why I'm going here. It's never stopped any of us, right? So, fair question to ask. Comments? Do you have anything? If you don't, that's fine.
I just think the core of this is a matter of, I think Christians can choose based on their conscience how to interact with these kinds of issues in the world. And I think it's already been said. I think you want to honor what you don't want to violate your conscience in these things, and you want to kind of honor so that, you feel like you could stand before God and you could say, I did what I thought I believed was right.
Yeah. So, follow-up question to that then. Let's lead into this for a second. So, if you are trying as a believer, you're trying to establish a healthy place of conscience, because obviously some of this stuff is not black and white laid out as to how you're going to deal with all of this in the Bible. So you have to wrestle with God on some of this stuff. So how do you appropriately think through some of that without just kind of clustering things? What are good questions you can kind of ask yourself? How do you dig through that? Because I think one of the things as a Christian community that can lock us up as we try to use discernment is the fear of. And I don't want to put a specific thing on the end of that because I think it might be multiple things. But one of the common ones that you can hear is, well, if I do this, I'm afraid it will affect my witness, or I'm afraid someone will misunderstand, or there's a sequence of fears of, well, it might turn into this, or it might do this, or it might expose this, or jeopardize this, or, if I support, gay people in some fashion, that my kids might get the wrong idea and think that that's acceptable and that that's a good thing to do and that it's okay if I do this, it might send the wrong message. There's a lot of what ifs that are fear-based of, if I do this, what happens next? or what it looks like or what it
Yeah,
means.
and I love thinking back
How do you deal with that?
to Jesus' life. Like, he talked about being in the world, not of the world. Jesus was known as a friend of sinners. You don't get that label unless you're around people, associating with people. And so being in the world, not of the world, means there's times where you want to be able to build a relationship with people who are very different than you, don't think like you, don't believe like you. But that's where mission is meant to happen. And so I want to be careful in some ways to almost push against my own uncomfortability, to put me in a place where I can be in the world but not of it, and be at a place where I can have a chance then to live on mission and reach people where they are.
Yeah. Hiding away from this community doesn't seem, if we look at Christ's life, as you're saying, doesn't really seem like the answer to the problem. We can't be around or expose me, my kids, whatever, to people who are thinking this way, living this way. That doesn't seem to be the correct answer. One, I don't know that you're going to get away with it at this point. I mean, honestly, it's everywhere. I don't know where you are going that you think you cannot run into any of that stuff. I would love to know where that place is, that one little hidden spot in the universe that isn't touched by this. But so what's the alternative? If the extremes of the pendulum swinging is complete avoidance and the other extreme is charging in head first in the name of love, but like almost without caution and just open arms, for discernment, if it lives in the middle, how do you figure that out? Like, what are some questions, I guess, that you can ask yourself? Because obviously, if there's no right or wrong answer on this, then you can't say this is how you do it. But what are some questions you can ask yourself to figure out how to be discerning when you're figuring out what you want to do, if it's the right thing to do, if it's the right thing to say, if it's the right place to go?
Yeah, so some questions. This is more broad, again, than the issue of homosexuality. This is questions to kind of help guide your conscience. Because you might be uncomfortable about something that God's really like, you don't need to be uncomfortable about that. And so you want to grow in your conscience. And so some questions or principles. First of all, like you mentioned, fear. Fear is always of the enemy. That's not discernment. It's fear, but some other things to think through.
But how to know the difference between healthy caution and fear? That is where we're stuck. Help me.
Okay.
Answer that.
Okay. So some principles to think through is, first, as I'm trying to guide and grow my conscience, does the Bible explicitly call me to do or not do this? Usually the answer is no.
So starting with the black and white.
Let's start with the black and white.
Okay.
Is this a thou shalt not issue? If the answer is no, then I think I'm doing this off the top of my head, so I might get some order here wrong. But
that's okay.
It's 1 Timothy, is it 2 or chapter 4 or whatever, when Paul talks about everything that God created is good. And is to be, and it is good if it can be received with thanksgiving and prayer. So he's talking about, again, a conscience issue here, and say, okay, if this is not a black and white issue, can I thank God for this? Like, can I thank God while watching this movie? Can I thank God participating in this thing and do it prayerfully and be like, amen, hallelujah? If not, then I've got a conscience issue. If yes, if I'm like, yeah, I think I can do that, then like, cool, go for it. Mm-hmm. But if the answer is no, I don't think I could pray and thank God for this. Mm-hmm. Then Romans 14 is helpful. It lays out how to navigate these issues of conscience and gives you these categories of like weaker faith and stronger faith. Ironically, the way that we often approach conscience issues is we tend to think that people who are most restrictive are the strongest Christians. Paul turns that on its head, and this might be an overgeneralization of Romans 14, but basically it's that the one who is weak in faith is the one who puts up lots of rules, and the one who is strong in faith is the one who is more free. And he gives some directions to both of them. He's like, the one who is weak in faith, who has all these rules, don't pass judgment on the one who feels more free than you. This is really practical, because if I have a conscience issue, one of the first things I start doing with that is I start judging you on the basis of my conscience issue. And Paul's like, nah, don't do that. And then he turns around and says, now to the one who is more free, don't despise the one who's weaker. Don't despise the person who has more rules. and look down on them and be like, come on, just love people, man. You're living in fear. He's like, don't do that. It's like so practical, aimed right exactly at what we usually do with these things. So it's like, how do you treat other people with that? And then I think then the last category is to look to see what the Bible might say about how to approach these kinds of issues. Like 1 Corinthians 8 comes with that really surprising, hey, everything belongs to Jesus. You can be free here. And so learning and starting to absorb that theology of Jesus' kingship into my life should have the result, it seems like, of making me live more freely in his world. And so you can just start to navigate and pray through those things. So that's kind of some levels, if that's helpful.
Okay. Other thoughts on that? Yay, nay?
I don't know. I think the way that I would think about that is, I think if you look at Jesus' life, and this has kind of been mentioned, but I'll drop into it a little bit here. Jesus had this unique way to balance between being with people who were ungodly, the sinners, the prostitutes, and I'm sure there were homosexuals, in those crowds as well. But he had this unique ability to balance being with them in a way that he could communicate that God cared about them, that God loved them, that he cared about them, but yet not condoning or participating in those sinful things that, they may have been involved in. And so I think that's kind of the goal that we're trying to do. We're trying to find a way to balance being with people, communicating, being a representation of God's gospel love and grace to them, and that God cares about them, while not going so far that we kind of just say, there's no issue here, you're fine. And walking that balance that Jesus walked. And I think when Jesus looks at the world, he tends to see it like these are sheep without a shepherd. These are people, they're lost, they're blind, they don't know what they're doing, they don't know where they're going. And I think his heart is that they need a shepherd, and he's the shepherd. And I think that's kind of how I want to try to center the way that I think about how I relate to people. They're lost. They don't see. They don't understand. They're blind. They don't know any different. They need a shepherd. And so I think that's, and there are some things I think in the Bible that, can be instructive on the other end. I think it's pretty clear we don't want to be like the Pharisees. We don't want to respond to people like they did. So we can look at how they responded to people and how Jesus lambasted them, and we can learn some things that we can say, well, okay, I don't want to be like that. So I think those are just some biblical parameters that I think can help you, discern what that balance might look like. And, we try to walk it out as best we can.
And I had another thought based on kind of just thinking about Jesus' life. A general principle here might not be applicable across the board universally, but it seems like one of the ways that Jesus walked this out was by putting people over issues. So often we treat things as issue first and then the person, but for example, I think of Zacchaeus. So Zacchaeus, the chief tax collector, he's in charge of funding the Roman occupation and oppression in the city of Jericho. He's a bad guy. Everyone hates him for good cause. Jesus invites himself over to dinner before Zacchaeus has repented. And so you can imagine a counterfactual scenario here where Zacchaeus never repented. Jesus still went to his house for dinner. Maybe there were lots of tax collectors that Jesus went to their house for dinner and they never repented. It certainly seems like that because he gets the reputation of hanging out with these people. And then he goes over and he has dinner at Zacchaeus' house. All of Zacchaeus' money has come from robbery and oppression. So Jesus could make an issue about this, right? I can't eat this food because this was stolen off the backs of my people, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's like a reasonable issue to make a thing about, but Jesus doesn't. Jesus goes over and has dinner with Zacchaeus, and in doing so rescues him. I think we would probably be better off if we were more like that. And so like that it gets complicated, it gets messy, because we're not Jesus. But I feel like I'd like to err on that side of things than on the side of throwing up walls over issues and missing Jesus' heart of compassion for people.
I think the way that I would phrase that is, I think what Jesus did is he put first things first, And when you put first things first, the other things tend to follow. And so if you're using Zacchaeus as an example, what Zacchaeus needed was a savior. He needed someone to see that God loved him and cared about him enough and that he could be redeemed. And once that took place in his life, you see the effects of how that bears on the issues that, characterized his life.
So basically, instead of focusing in on the fruit of Zacchaeus' life, he focused in on the real issue, and then the fruit changed because that's really what Christ came and addressed.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing that we've been saying, just in another way of saying it, that the real issue is people need Jesus, and Jesus needs to be the center. And if you start there, let Jesus kind of can handle the other stuff.
Okay.
Which would be the same whether it be a tax collector issue or even people who, the healing a paralytic. The 4 friends brought him in, and he can't walk. Yeah, Jesus goes after the heart first, then deals with other stuff. So it's whether it be a physical thing there or a thing they're dealing with, Jesus went to the heart first, kept the first thing first.
So let's make the direct connection here. So if you know someone or who is homosexual or struggling with homosexuality or a proclaimed homosexual person, the issue is not, the first thing is not their homosexuality.
In some ways, buying into that is really buying into that as primary identifier.
Yes.
So basically, don't play the game.
Right? Let's not make that error.
Yeah, don't play the game that's the main identifying issue where that becomes primary importance.
Yeah, and I think over these last couple of weeks, I think we've heard in the messages that homosexuality is one of a list of issues usually that are listed in these kinds of passages. So in one sense, it's not any different than any of the issues. It's not any different than lying or sexual immorality or any of the other things. The bottom line is the starting place is that person needs Jesus. And so I don't want to focus on this particular issue in their life, whatever it might be. What I want to try to do is be a means of grace that God might lead them to Jesus. And then I'll let Jesus kind of handle some of this other stuff.
So in this same thread of speak that we're going through here, friendships, relationships, people you spend your time with, for adults or for children, in particular young people, hanging out, spending a lot of time with people that are either choosing this lifestyle, exploring it, open to it, whatever classifying on that spectrum you want to give. Is there any word of caution that the Bible might have for those types of choices? I know there's some stuff, I think it's in Proverbs, that talks about the company that you keep, and the real potential to be influenced by the company you keep. And yet, when we look at Jesus' life, when you talk about what you guys just were sharing, he kept company that was, in some ways might make you question, is that really a good thing to do? But his direction of influence was from him to them, not them to him. So is that what makes the difference, or is there really a cautionary tale somewhere in there for us to heed?
I think I might have a really practical kind of little nugget here, because on one hand, Proverbs says, don't be a friend of fools, and yet Jesus is a friend of sinners. So,
Exactly.
So we know that Proverbs, bad company corrupts good morals, and yet I want to be like Jesus, who's the friend of sinners. Here's, I think, the way to thread the needle: keep more company with Jesus than you do with sinners. And if you are with Jesus a lot, then I think you're probably safe to be with sinners a lot. because he'll be kind of the anchor holding you as you're going out on mission. He's the rope that you're, it's the danger, I think, is I'm going to go off on mission. I just go like wander off and go hanging out with the world without that lifeline back to Jesus. I'm going to get lost.
Well, and the reality is, where you spend your time, where you invest your heart, you become like that in many ways. And so the danger is you don't have that tie-in, you probably won't start facing those temptations in different areas.
Yeah. So I, to just put it simply, stay really rooted in Christ and in his word, and then go out and be friends with people in the world.
Yeah, so this isn't the confidence of,
in
I
the
feel
church.
confident that I
Yeah,
will
that's it.
be okay, or that I'm strong enough to handle it,
No,
or that
you're
I
not,
think I'll be
but
okay.
Jesus is.
It's a no to those.
Yeah.
You're not strong enough to handle it. There is no person that is not susceptible to any particular sin.
Except Jesus, so stick with him, and then you'll be, and yeah.
Yeah, I would just, if we're talking about young people, I think this is just something that really does require some parental wisdom, because I think, knowing where your child is at, whether they're going to be influenced and shaped by some, hanging out with certain people, or whether they're mature enough in who they are that they can be around those people and maybe be a good influence on them. I think that's, really requires some parental wisdom in how you, walk young people through those things.
And then as you grow, knowing yourself, are you easily influenced, or are you the influencer?
Yes.
And being honest with yourself about
Yes.
that, because you can't sit there and go, no, I'm good, but everyone else is looking at you going, no, you're not.
And I think being honest in evaluating the effect that certain practices you do are having on you, and inviting other input into that, because we're often, the easiest person for us to deceive is ourselves. And we can get ourselves into things that aren't good for us, and lie to ourselves along the way, that we kind of justify that it's okay.
All right, other questions. What do we do if a close family member identifies as gay? This is long, so bear with me, because I'm going to drop a lot of question marks, so just come with me on the ride. What do we do if a close family member identifies as gay? How can we love them but also be clear that we don't support the sin? What if our faith and viewpoint alienates us from them despite how much we affirm our love for them? I'm going into other little boxes here. How can we find healing with them if the damage is already done and the family member has pushed us away from them? And if they claim to not be a believer anymore, how do we approach rebuilding the bridge besides praying? Lots of question marks in there.
Yeah, lots of things there.
Good.
I think the first little piece of it I was going to say is, I think one of the precautionary tales there is loving someone isn't done just in words, but it's an ongoing, active action to choose to love them in the process. So I think that, I'm not trying to judge this person or assume anything, but I think it's really easy for us to say, like, yeah, I love them. And what are you doing to care for them and love them in that process? How are you continuing to love them even as they've come out to you, whatever else? It's that ongoing relationship piece that really shows your love for them or not in many respects. And I think that the reason I say this is because I think it's really easy to say, oh yeah, I love them, but not actually follow it up with action. But that's just one piece of that question, obviously.
Yeah, there's a lot of pieces there.
Yeah, no, I think that's good. I think, I like what the person's intent seems to be here, that they want to try to love this person in the way God would want them to do that. And I think what Eric said was right on target there. But I think you also can communicate that you don't agree with the choices that they've made. So it's kind of like, I love you, but I don't necessarily agree with what you're doing. That doesn't mean that I won't, be there in my love for you and care about you and be supportive of you. But this is a line that I can't agree with. And that's it's not an easy walk to balance in that.
And that said, I think the precaution there would be, I don't have to say that every single time I say I love them.
Correct. Yeah, that's a good point.
I don't have to say, like, I love you, but. It just comes as a caveat. It doesn't really feel like true love then.
The reality is this is a close family member, I think that the question was, they know where you stand, and you can articulate that once, and they know where you stand.
Yeah.
What they don't know is they know where you stand on this issue. They don't know where you stand on them.
Yes.
And so it will
And how
take,
you're going to live that out, like what it
Yeah.
looks like to stick with them once that's out in the open for you to deal with. Because, I mean, I think the assumption, when the whole reason people are scared to tell people is because the assumption is there's going to be judgment, there's going to be walls put up, and possibly broken relationships because people are going to say, I can't accept that, so I can't accept you. This is it.
Yeah. And so because they know where you stand on this issue, but they don't know where you stand on them, and it sounds like maybe there's already damage done in this relationship, you're probably gonna have to go the extra mile in convincing and proving and articulating, demonstrating your practical, real relational love for them. Because it's not, like, they don't see it, so you gotta prove it.
What's a good way for that? What should that look like, though? Because obviously, I think, again, the concern is I don't want to send the wrong message. I don't want to say, I love you, and let them reinterpret what that means as I start to be kind to them and do all these other things where they think, oh, I'm growing on you. You're becoming okay with it or something like that. Like, there are different concerns, I think, that arise in the process of this. And I'm not saying even if that were the case, that means you did something wrong or that you need to clarify. Maybe you don't, maybe you do. How do you kind of keep moving through that with somebody where you let them know, hey, I'm still actively loving you, but I'm also still actively kind of holding my ground on this issue that I think what I think, and I'm not going to be persuaded or convinced over time to feel differently because that's what my love for you is going to do. If it's not going to do that, how do you handle that?
So here's the thing. I think that there's probably a fundamental error going on if that's kind of the way that you're thinking. Like, I want to make sure that they don't misinterpret me. Mm-hmm. Why do you care so much about what they think about you? So they get the wrong idea and think that you're completely affirming, okay, that doesn't change anything, and you still have opportunities to share the gospel with them. And if you are so loving to them that they think, wow, you must accept me, and be like, I have better news for you. Jesus will accept you and change you. Rather than getting caught up on, I need to make sure that I am understood correctly about this issue. Why can't I think that's fear. I think it's fear.
It may be.
And so instead, when it comes up, I can articulate it. This is a close family. They know where I stand. If they question, I'll ask, and let's keep getting past this issue to Jesus.
Yeah, I think just to walk this out further, I think even if you try your best to love them the way God would call you to, and let's say you do that reasonably well, you're probably not perfect, and whether you've told them or whether they know where you stand, there's no guarantee that their response to you won't reject you. Because you may not give them what they want to accept you. And that may be just one of the realities that you have to bear while continuing to try to express God's love to them and Jesus' desire to have a relationship with them. Jesus said that he didn't come to bring peace, but he came to bring a sword, and that in some cases it would be brother against sister and father against, daughter. And so peace is a two-way street, and not everyone, you can do everything you can do, but that doesn't necessarily guarantee that there's going to be peace there, and acceptance. And it doesn't necessarily mean you've done something wrong if that's the case. If you've tried to the best of your ability to love that person the way God would call you to.
Yeah, and I think that, the question said there's already been damage done to some degree. It may mean extending the olive branch, saying, hey, some of my actions may have caused you hurt, and I'm sorry that hurt was caused, but I want to maintain a relationship. I want to be able to continue to, continue to do whatever that relationship entails, whether it be, let's grab lunch, let's just hang out and talk together, whatever it is. It might be extending the olive branch and actually saying something and not just assuming that it'll get better without effort.
I have a follow-up, if I may, before we have an important update on this question. So, new piece of the question. What if a family member is identifying as gay and you have made it clear once that you don't think that is good for them, but they keep bringing it up and wanting you to be happy for them and celebrate it? Do I need to keep saying again and again every time they talk excitedly about their romance that I can't be happy about it because I think that it will bring harm to them? Or can I smile and nod and move on at times?
Yeah, that's where the realities of everyday
rubber
life
meets the
hit
road.
the road. Yeah, these are complex things to deal with.
I think there is a reality for our culture, and this isn't, I'm not tying this specifically to this person's question, but there's a broader comment, that there is a idea that the LGBTQ plus community is teaching us how to think of and accept and feel about them, and that as we get on board, that we are progressing, that is something we need to learn and kind of evolve to as a positive thing. So I don't think it would be uncommon for someone to think that as you're experiencing this and they're bringing it into your world, that they are in some way educating you. They are giving you an opportunity to learn about real life and what's out there and to learn how to properly respond to it. So obviously, the Bible and the culture are not going to agree on what that's going to look like. But to think that someone may not choose some level of persistence, thinking that they are teaching you slowly, I don't know that like we can rule that out just because that's the way that it's being kind of brought up. And teaching is sometimes done slowly over time. As you get used to things, you get more and more comfortable with them. And I don't want to put it like they're wearing you down, because that sounds a little bit more of an attack, and that's not really what I mean. But like the slow, gradual erosion of an ocean wave, that you slowly might get used to something and kind of get on board. Even if we look at media and how they present this, even the people in TV shows and movie plots and stuff that we see that are opposed, after they're exposed to it and love wins, over time, they slowly acclimate and kind of get on board. So I think this is a real way people look at this.
And
How do you handle
in some
that?
respects, is that any different a tactic than sometimes Christians think about when they're thinking about loving people who don't know Jesus? Like, if I keep introducing it, keep talking about it, keep making the norm.
It's not the culture wars, it's the evangelism war.
Well, it goes both ways, yeah. But I think this goes back to what Don was saying, too, is that there may be a point where it might not ever be fully the same that each party wished it was. Whether it be for whatever reason that is, it might not go perfectly well in that respect. So I think that goes back to your point.
And if, if the two people really do care about each other, if there really is relationship there, maybe you can have a conversation. Maybe I'd say to them, look, let's make a deal. I won't beat you over the head with my Bible every time we talk about this, and you don't share with me all the details of, let's keep our relationship, focused around some things that we don't disagree over.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Maybe there's a way to navigate that if you've got a real
Now, in some ways, that
relationship.
might feel like forcing the issue, because someone could say, well, if that's a primary identifier for me and a major piece of my world, and you can't accept it, then you are in turn rejecting me. So is that the choice you're going to make?
So like that might be a
So
solution, or it might not go
I'm not
well.
saying
Maybe,
that's
I
the
don't
wrong
know.
thing to do, but in some ways, that kind of escalates the intensity of the, can we have something here? Now, I'm not
Maybe-
saying it's by you, but by that person's definition and standard of approaching this, it does seem to naturally escalate it. So,
And maybe another potential avenue. Again, I think we're just trying to give some helpful advice to a tricky situation. Another potential way to try to go is just try to be a human, and in being a human, try to be Christ-centered. And what I mean by that is, I think that we can get so tied into knots about this issue, and I need to make all the questions of if I do this and this and this. Can we just be normal people and be like, hey, how was your weekend? Even though they're gonna go into their relationship and this and that and stuff, and questions can you just be a normal person, ask about their weekend, and be like, oh, cool, okay.
And some of it might be having the conversation of redefining terms of like, okay, what does acceptance really mean? Things like that. Is it meaning, hey, I have to know and accept every single little detail about you? Or is it, hey, I can still love you and care for you and we can have a relationship while not agreeing on other issues? Do you agree on every other issue in life?
Is it okay to redefine terms like that and stand your ground on that, though? Because even if you have two people who are both defining their terms on acceptance like that, you're both not even agreeing on that, at this point possibly.
Yeah, but at least you understand where the other person's
you
coming
do,
from.
but that doesn't mean that necessarily brings peace or clarity from that, because someone can still say, well, that's not good enough. Like, that's not okay, because I'm going to work under my identifier of that word and you're going to work under yours, and there's still, that doesn't clear up the path forward together.
Well, the sad reality of any relationship is a two-way street. Both parties have to want a relationship. If one party doesn't want a relationship, you can fight tooth and nail. If they continue to reject you in that process, like, there's not a whole lot you can do. It has to be both sides willing to say, hey, even if we don't agree on every issue, we can move forward and have a relationship in some form or fashion. And if both parties aren't there, it makes it very difficult.
Yeah, I would assume that if there's a relationship here, there's some basis to it that they both value. And I think my point that I was making earlier is let's focus on the part, let's focus on why we're here together in a relationship in the first place. We don't need to focus on the things that maybe we don't agree on. But is there enough that we can enjoy about one another and agree on and talk about that,
and that can be normal. Like, we do that with other things all the time, that, like, political things, like you might be like, hey, look,
exactly,
bro, like, can we just, like, be family and not talk about this at Thanksgiving dinner? And, like, there's even, like, some really, like, mundane things people can get really, really interested in, some huge sports fanatic, and I'm like, I don't care, like, hey, let's talk about something else. like that can be normal. And then maybe just the last little thing before we maybe go on to another question is in all of these things, remember, this is not the main issue. Jesus is the main issue. And so look for opportunities to get past this issue and get to Jesus.
Okay. Before we move on to the next question, because we have a good few more, we have one more jumping back, a clarifying piece. Not this question, but going back to the Lego question, if that helps
The
you
Lego
reference
person again,
the
okay.
business and group support question that we were going through. So this is the follow-up. I will now read it. It doesn't seem like the idea that God owns everything logically leads to your assertion that everything is permissible. All pornography belongs to God, but it is pretty clearly not good for Christians. The passage talking about food offered to idols says that if someone tells you that it was offered to idols, you shouldn't eat. He says not to raise the issue, but if it is raised, he seems to default to giving up his rights and denying himself. And they're referencing 1 Corinthians 10:28.
Yeah, and that's...
Still reading, one sec. Hold.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Wait, there's more.
Okay. How does that apply to today? If people are pointing out that a company or business is encouraging young people to experiment with their gender and sexuality, can we continue supporting it? Now answer.
Okay, so yeah, that is a good clarification that Paul does add there, that he says, so if someone is like, here, this meat has been offered to idols, then he's like, then at that point you probably should, should say no, for the sake of like a witness thing here.
But I'd have to go back and look at that, but isn't the point there that you don't want to do something that would violate the other person's conscience?
Yeah, it's more of like,
situation?
yeah, even
because
there,
it's meaningful to them, because they think something offered to idols has meaning that you would say, okay, I don't want to eat it then because you don't want to violate.
I think you're right.
I think that's
I think you're right, that even there it's concerned. So if someone... Yeah, so I think the situation, if I remember correctly, the situation in Corinthians is more of like the other person is like, hey, you can't eat that. That's sacrificed to idols. Then don't eat it because this is a violation of their conscience, and my love for that person trumps my liberty to eat whatever I want. Okay. So even there, it's not. So it's not saying if you find out somehow that this meat was sacrificed to idols, now you shouldn't eat it anymore. Even there, he's still saying it still belongs to Jesus. And now, you're right. Paul says all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial. I mean, your example, the example of pornography is neither permissible nor beneficial, and so just because the earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof does not mean I can go and sin however I want. Mm-hmm. But in interacting with people in the world and interacting with the things of the world and enjoying the things of the world, those all do belong to Jesus. And he gives me a path forward to partake in them in faith. Yeah.
But maybe the other side of that coin is if there is, and maybe this is the issue here, if there is symbolism associated with something, and that symbolism violates your conscience, then you shouldn't do it.
When you say symbolism, do you
mean
like
the Lego thing? There is symbolism associated with that Lego set. It's not just a set of blocks. Mm-hmm. There's a particular symbolism that's been attached to it that you may or may not be comfortable, associating with that symbolism. Mm-hmm. And I think that's, again, a conscience choice that people can make in these cultural kind of things as to where they draw those lines.
Yeah, because in that situation, remember, when the situation Paul says is, okay, there's some meat for sale, it's been sacrificed to idols. One person is okay with that and the other person isn't. And so he's like, if you are okay, still don't for the sake of the other person. But if you're that other person who isn't comfortable with it, mm-hmm. then for you it would be sin. So don't do it. So if that feels to you like a violation of your conscience to buy those Legos, then don't buy those Legos.
Or if you have other Christians over who you know would be uncomfortable with that, don't pull out your LGBT Lego set.
Or first build a Noah's Ark out of it, and then you're fine.
Well, I think it goes back to the idea of the personal conscience. And the last question there was about supporting companies who...
Yeah, I think that was a big piece of it, supporting. It's not just the product. Again? Yeah. I can go back for it 1 second. Got a lot of questions here. Do a lot of scrolling. Okay. How does that apply to today? If people are pointing out that a company or a business is encouraging young people to experiment with their gender and sexuality, can we continue supporting it?
That was the word I wanted to pick out there, because I think there's probably a difference between companies out there endorsing and encouraging. I don't see many companies out there saying, like, go do that. It's more like, hey, I'm going to support those things and be okay with those things, that process. Like, for example, I'm going to bring up there's two companies out there that are very similar in Home Depot and Lowe's. Mm-hmm. Home Depot is very LGBT affirming. Lowe's is not. Mm-hmm. And so there's people that I know that will shop at one, not the other, because of that. And that's a conscious issue, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to mandate, though, that every Christian has to go to one or the other because the other one is okay with it or not. And so I think that'd be nitpicking the word a little bit in terms of, again, a personal conscience issue versus a mandate for all Christians in that process. If that makes sense. Anything to add to that?
Yeah. And again, we parsed out this a little bit earlier, but what it means to support something and what you're exactly supporting.
Home Depot is out to make a buck. Really, they probably don't actually care. And a question of supporting, and me supporting this company that supports this issue is, okay, to what extent is my support of this company actually supporting that issue? Is this purchase going towards that, or is this just going in,
Yeah, and even within like corporate structure, I'll take it there, because a lot of people work in businesses that maybe don't have a specific product like that, or maybe you're not the purchaser, but maybe you're just in the corporate realm. And there's a ton of stuff that would fall under this support category that takes place just in people's jobs. Yeah. If a lot of that is geared towards letting people who identify in these groups under these categories feel welcomed, not mistreated, and a part of a team, I don't know that there's anything in there that sounds really bad and wrong. Yeah. I don't know that that's telling people, go, live this lifestyle, go be this way. It seems more like that's saying something like, if that's you, we don't want to reject you in the name, for business purposes just because of that. There's more to people, which actually sounds like a decent biblical premise on people's existence, that that's not your only identifier that matters about you.
Yeah,
Something like that, maybe that's not so criminal.
Yeah, and as people who do believe in Genesis 1:27 that all humans are created in the image of God, Christians I think should be at the forefront of making sure that people who we disagree with, their rights are protected. And this might be going off in a different direction, but like, we should be first in line to say, I like this secular corporate workplace or whatever, it should be welcoming for everybody. Because I believe in Genesis 1:27, and I don't need corporate edicts to defend my faith or to promote my gospel. Jesus is king, and he's capable of doing that. But I would love to see all of my coworkers welcome and safe here. Like, that's just a human rights thing, and that's built like don't be tricked by the partisan culture wars. Human rights is a Christian thing. We came up with that. Genesis 1:27 came up with that. And so let's not like cede that to the other side because of these issues.
You might be diving into larger secondary conversation.
Yeah, that's probably a whole other, so we can go back to something else. But.
Opening up a whole other can of worms over there.
Yeah, just maybe one thought. And again, I think these are places where people have to decide where they draw the lines, because, the reality is, if you have a 401k or an IRA that invests in funds, chances are you're supporting some company by investing in it that is doing something that would violate your faith.
Just put all your 401k into Chick-fil-A.
So and some Christians pick one issue, some Christians pick another issue that's important to them. And so I just think these are matters that you have to wrestle through and decide where you want to draw the line, so you can stand before God and say, Lord, I tried to do this the way that I thought would honor you the best I could.
But not just considering restriction, also considering your call to love and care for all people, because you're accountable for both of those.
Yeah, and if that's the line you feel like you need to draw on those, then by all means do that. But if someone draws a line different than you, it's not our place to judge them for where they draw their line in their
that's that Romans 14, one person don't pass judgment on the other because they have a different conscience.
Okay. Moving on, a long-awaited question, because we have a few, and it's also on our pre-done question list.
Okay.
Weddings. Dun, dun.
Well,
So
I think we could talk a lot of this one, but go ask your question
we
first.
could, yeah. I'm going to attempt to take the questions that we got for it and go there instead of just queuing weddings. But this is our header. We're going to go into this territory. So suppose you're a Christian with a close friend or family member who is homosexual and invites you to their wedding. You are against the marriage because it is against God's design, but you want to show God's love to them and not fracture the relationship with that person. How should you think through and respond biblically to this situation? That's the first one.
So we talked a little about this in our pastor meeting the other day, and I thought, Don, you had a great perspective of this. So in an effort to be somewhat succinct, somewhat succinct, I'd love to have you kind of go first this, and we can add anything we need to. But I thought your perspective that you talked about actually had me rethinking a couple things in my mind about this.
Well, let me read the second one.
Questions, I remember what I said.
That's another good question. Following up on that, this is another thing on weddings, but more specific. Should Christians attend wedding ceremonies that are clearly in contrast to God's direction? And for example, they have polygamous, adulterous, homosexual, or some other sexual deviation from God's design. So this is a little bit broader, but still in the same thread. They wanted to expand.
Probably the way we answer one question probably would answer all of them.
Yes,
hopefully.
but they want to make sure
Go for it,
everything's on the
Don.
table. They've given us all the pieces. So we're looking at you.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, these are complex issues, and there can be a lot of different nuances that might affect how you would think through them. For instance, it might be different if I'm being asked to be a participant in the wedding as opposed to attend the wedding.
Meaning an officiant or like a bridal party member?
I'm assuming
or
unless you're a
groomsman.
pastor, you're not going to be officiating. But if I was being asked to officiate, then yeah, that might be a different way of thinking
Well,
about it.
we live in a
But if
time
I'm
where
like
anyone can officiate if you go
maid
get
of
a
honor
piece
or
of paper.
or the best
So-
man, or if I'm being asked to participate in the wedding as
Okay.
a member of the wedding party, I might think differently. But again, I think this is kind of a conscience issue, depending on your relationship with a person, how you want to walk out that balance of how do I communicate God's, the lifestyle of Jesus to them, where that God loves them and cares about them, and I'm an expression of that, versus kind of endorsing something that I think God would disagree, or not approve of. So whether you attend or not attend would depend on how you parse through those factors. I don't think it's a right or wrong thing either way. I think you have to decide, and again, your relationship with that person is a factor. If they're a family member, that's a factor. So how would you communicate your love and support for them as a person, even if you weren't in favor of what they were kind of choosing to do in the wedding?
Yeah. And so there's a couple levels here. On one hand, like thinking through your relationship with the person is important. If this is just, some kind of random coworker and stuff, and they don't know anything like that, just everyone in the office got invited, kind of, then, to go or not go, it probably doesn't add much weight either way. And but if it's like a family member, there's a relationship like at stake here, and a close relationship, they probably know where you stand. If they're asking you to be the best man or whatever, like they know where you stand on this issue. But there is a relationship at stake here, and so, so can you, for the sake of the relationship, say like I love you, I'll be there. That's probably where I would come down. Of course, like I couldn't officiate that because I cannot bless what God has not blessed. But I can love a friend and maybe even stand next to a friend who we've had these conversations, and they know I disagree with what you're doing, but you're my buddy, I'll be there for you. And so it kind of echoes in a lot of ways the other things that we've had. Like these are conscience issues and relationship issues, and navigating how to do that to live on mission.
Yeah, but the short and sweet part is, if someone's asking, is it possible to attend an event like that as a believer and not do something that you clearly shouldn't be doing? So I think the answer is yes, potentially yes. It's not a no, you can't go. And I think that's probably the bottom line to the question, but then there's all the other pieces that you guys are laying out.
I think it's yes from a cut and dried black and white perspective,
Yes, okay.
with the caveat that you have to wrestle through this with kind of your conscience and you doing before God what you
Yes.
think is right.
But there's the variation where it's possible for someone to do that and not have done something that they shouldn't have done.
For sure.
If they've done that wrestling.
In our humble, limited understanding, it seems like we would say yes.
Okay.
Well, I guess even us, the team, there's certain things we'd all be in agreement on in terms of like, would any of us officiate the wedding? No. But there's other pieces like that might have different conscious levels in.
Yeah, because I was just
Victoria.
listening to him and I'm saying, I don't know if I'd draw the line the same place Brendan
Yeah.
would
Like,
there.
like
I don't
being
know
in the
that I
wedding
could
party.
be the best man
Yeah, I don't know.
in
Yeah.
the wedding with my conscience.
I was thinking the same
That's
thing, yeah.
That's a statement of I'm endorsing something that I don't think I could endorse.
Yeah,
But-
and maybe it is.
So
yeah,
you might, for
maybe
example,
you're right.
That might just be my personal
Yep.
conscience. Yours might be different. You might be fine with that, and I could understand that.
So thinking about that, so someone asked you to pray at a reception after a gay wedding. Would you feel comfortable in your conscience to be able to do that?
I would, yeah.
Oh, that's funny because I would have said I don't know about that.
Yes, but to me the whole point is that it exactly illustrates the fact that different consciences can have different pieces where you might be having be able to stand up there with them but not be able to pray. You might be okay with praying, not standing up there. So the whole point illustrating is the fact that consciences can draw lines in places.
The question is, what am I going to pray?
Yeah, I was going to say, it might be what he's going to pray.
Thanks for the food.
So as
and
long
I
as I
for the
could
day.
pray in a way that I
Yeah.
felt like didn't violate my conscience in what
Yep.
I was saying, then I'm
And that's
fine.
where I was thinking too. I was like, I can pray that
These are people that God cares about.
Exactly.
And
I pray that God can, that they would know God, that they would honor God. But am I going to pray to God to like bless their marriage? I don't know if I go that far. So there's just different things that you can think about those pieces.
Yeah. All right, follow-up segment, because I thought there was more. So what should your attitude be if a gay Christian friend tells you they're getting married and invites you to their wedding? And again,
this is
I
more-
can't determine the definition of gay Christian here because that's all I have. So do your
so the
best.
question's a gay Christian
Gay
friend.
I would
Christian
assume
friend.
from that question that they're probably actually living out and they identify as.
Well, if it's
Yeah,
their
like, yeah, I
wedding,
guess-
I'm going to assume
yeah.
that
Yeah.
that's
So let's
We're going
let's
for it.
answer the question from that. So this might be wrong,
Well, because
but
Yeah.
if they're just a same-sex attracted Christian and they're getting married in a heterosexual marriage,
I don't know
That's
that there would be a
different.
question.
I think the
Yeah,
issue
so
would
I'm
arise
assuming
if-
that
yeah,
so
those
this
things
is
are
somebody
right.
who would say, "I'm a Christian.
I'm also gay.
I'm also gay, and I think that's okay with God, and I'm getting married."
and I'm
Yeah.
proceeding with a gay marriage
Yeah.
at some level, yeah.
please text us if that's not the
Yeah, if that's not
correct-
it, please
That's how we
clarify,
will-
because we're going to proceed with this, and if
Yeah.
that's wrong, you send it in and you let us know,
Yeah.
and we will go back for that, but yes.
to me, that one's a little trickier.
That is trickier.
I'm
Because
leveling up.
it's-
Don't you like what I've
it's-
done?
It would be easier for me to attend a wedding of an unbeliever because, I don't expect them to hold the same values and moral principles as a believer. But here we're getting close to that 1 Corinthians 6.
If
Is it
anyone,
5?
if anyone claims the name of brother, and
Yeah, that if you claim to be a believer and you're doing this, then that creates another issue that I have to wrestle through how I'm going to deal with that. So that would be a tougher one for me to think through, I think.
Yeah, and I think I would probably try to navigate this. Yeah, I think I'd probably approach this the same way that I would the other question, because I'm assuming if there's a close friend or family member, they already know where I stand on this issue. We've already had this discussion, and so still there too. If I would want to say I love you, I might on the basis of their claimed Christian faith give a little bit more pushback or be a little bit more kind of in my conversation of let's talk about these kinds of things. But I would probably still end up going. It's just that there's that added wrinkle to it.
Yeah, to me, it's the two pieces. One is our own conscience level of what we're thinking about that piece. The other part is, because of the relationship you have with that person, is there a place where you feel like God has given you a place to talk to them about those things? So that's where I think those two pieces, it's the relationship of do I say something and have the conversations, and the other piece is the conscience level of attendance or not.
Yeah.
Is the two big pieces of that, yeah.
Okay. We have a follow-up piece to that question from the anonymous texter. So next piece is, if I go to a wedding that I think is not for their good, can I be happy for them and say positive things about them getting married? I would attend to support our relationship, but I'm worried about my attitude being inappropriate and ruining their day and our relationship anyway.
Yeah, because part of the question I noticed it wasn't so much of like should I attend, but like what should my response be?
How do you engage if you're going to go?
So is that your friend calls you up like I'm getting married. Okay, like all right, in that moment I'm like you're on the phone. Like what do I say?
You have no answer for that.
I think part of it goes back into Jesus worried with the heart. So like what's your motivation in it? What's your heart towards those things in that process even? So it's even, hey, if you know this is possibly coming down the road in this relationship, like be thinking through those things now and think about like where would God draw your conscience line? Where would you work with him in that process? And even be thinking through those same topics now of how you respond if that were to come down the road. It's taking the time to work with the Spirit, work with God, even now as you think of this.
So I wonder. I'm not sure if this is right. So you can call me a heretic if I'm wrong. Romans 12 says to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. I'm trying to parse this out, because there aren't, initially at least, a lot of caveats to that. Like, if I should weep with somebody even if I think they're wrong for the reason they're weeping. Like I should still come hey, I see you struggling here. I'm sorry, man. And maybe I should even rejoice with somebody even if I don't think it's something to rejoice over. Now, the question is, when it's something that is just clearly and explicitly sin, I can't join. I can't join in rejoicing with that.
I don't think you can.
Yeah, I don't know. Okay, so I'm a heretic. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, that's like saying,
I'm talking myself out of my answer.
You're addicted to pornography, and I'm rejoicing, that you enjoy that. Do you know what I mean? It's just something. I think there are some lines there that, and I think the line is something that's for the person's good. Do you know what I mean? If something's not for your good, how can I rejoice in it with you? If you're rejoicing in something that's not for your good. I just went out and robbed a bank and I got all this money now.
Congratulations.
Aren't you excited for me? Well, so, but I understand the challenge of that question. How do I go and engage?
Let my incorrect answer and my walking back halfway through the question, realizing it, illustrate the challenge of this, because these are in the moment it comes
Well, this
up.
is an attempt at discernment. You're watching it live, people. This is us trying to do the thing. It's not always that easy. I mean, it sounded good at first, right? It sounded good for a second.
I was like, wait a second.
Yeah.
Part of the thought in my mind, I'm curious your guys' thoughts, is, okay, so they claim to be a Christian, also claim to be gay in that process. So at what point of discernment, too, is it, what do you do with the fact that if they believe it, but you look at their life, you look at what their thoughts are, you wouldn't agree they're actually a believer. So does that change your thoughts at all in terms of how you deal with the conversation and deal with the situation?
I mean, it might. Again, all these things are things I think you have to take time and pray about and try to discern how God would want you to handle the situation. Yeah. Life is often not black and white.
Yes.
And it's complex. Again, I would want to do my best to study Jesus in these kinds of things and try to discern. Because I think, even with the rich young ruler who came to him and said, hey, what do I need to do to get eternal life? And he said, well, here's the thing. You've got an idol in your life, and you need to let that go and come and follow me. And he walked away. But it says Jesus loved him, that he loved him even in his rejection of him. So I want to have that heart towards people and figure out how to navigate these things in a way that represents that, that heart of Jesus, that God cares about this person, He loves this person.
And that rich young ruler, it says he walked away sad. Because Jesus, I wonder if they're that combined with Jesus looking at him, loved him, like he saw this love and walked away. And so if people are going to walk away from us, let them see that and walk away sad.
But yet somehow there's a line where we can't misrepresent him in the things that are righteous and morally right either. We've got to figure out how to balance that in what we're representing.
Yeah, I mean, in that example, he made it very clear what needed to be done. He stood his ground. There wasn't a over trying to persuade. He didn't dress it up. He didn't
say, well, if you just maybe give $1,000 to the temple, then maybe that'll be good enough. No.
Yeah, he made it extremely plain. The offer was what it was. And when the ruler walked away, I don't even think there's anything that was like, and Christ chased him, or he was grieved, or there was no and then he went and did ... The choice was his.
And I think it was the same way with the sinners and the prostitutes and the tax collectors, that he was around them. He showed them God loved them and cared about them and said, look, there's a different way to live, follow me. Mm-hmm. And they could say, okay, or no thanks.
Yeah, and there were probably a lot of people who walked away sad.
Mm-hmm. Even talking about scripture, multiple times people walked away, Right. But you look at, these topics are, like I said, not black and white. These are a lot of gray in the middle where conscience will dictate different things to different people. You think about that Romans 12 passage, in that same paragraph, talks about loving people, talks about abhorring evil, and hate evil, talks about blessing those and rejoicing with those who rejoice and weep with those who weep, talks about living in harmony with other people, talks about living peaceably, it talks about, if possible, so far it depends on you to live peaceably. So it's saying it's not always possible. So there's a lot of back and forth there. Like, how do you balance those things when it comes to issues like this? How do you balance both hating evil and let your love be genuine in living peaceably with people and rejoicing with those who rejoice? There's a lot of different pieces that come together in conversations like this.
So have we just kind of failed to answer the question?
To some degree, yes. But I think it goes back to the individual conscience, some respect in that process of how do you deal with those well.
Yeah, sometimes, things like this, there's just so many nuances that there isn't a real answer to the question. There's just some generalities you can say to help guide you to get to the answer.
So I'm gonna answer every question here on out of, well, this is a conscience issue, and Jesus is the center, not sex. I'm just going to say that every time.
Yeah. Well, I guess it goes back to, I think, to your conscience, how you act, but also even your heart and motive in how you deal with those people and how you deal with those conversations. There's so many different pieces in terms of checking your own heart first and then going to those conversations.
Yeah, I think step one is get your heart and do whatever you can to keep your heart in proper alignment for you, that it is a heart of care and love, but also concern. Because I think if you're in a good place, and I say good, like loosely, we're not good, but you're in alignment with where Scripture, I think, would want you to be in your love and your care for people. Hopefully, that when you seek the Lord on what to do, that might help you figure out what needs to come out of there. Because I think if you're all twisted around with the way that you think about some of this stuff and the way that you feel, your fears, as we talked about earlier, it's probably, that stuff's gonna come out. So I think one question to ask is, what starts to flow out of me naturally? What is that? And maybe looking at that and trying to scrutinize that to see what's really going on in there. Because I don't know that you're gonna get in a good place if you're all twisted up yourself with how you feel about it and think about it. But I don't know. Other comments before I move on? Yay, nay? Okay. All right, so now we're going to start to go towards the church direction. Church body, church family. We're going to go there for a second. So if a member of the church body has acted on their temptations in this area and they don't want to turn, is this a church discipline offense? Now, I'm going to broaden this question real quick because I want to expand this into a heterosexual choice to do something like that too, not just act on this, but if there's a list of other sexually immoral stuff in the Bible, and I want to know if it's the same in application, how you're going to answer for that versus just this.
Yeah, I think the answer would be yes to both.
Okay.
That if there's willful, significant, unrepentant sin, and after appealing and going through an extended process to really graciously seek to have that person turn, they persist in that willful, sinful path, then at some point, I think that's where church discipline comes in. So whether it's sexual immorality in a heterosexual way, whether it's adultery, whether would be homosexuality. So this isn't struggling with attractions and desires. This is acting in some way that is a willful act of kind of rebelling against
unrepentance.
Yeah. And there's no repentance.
Yeah, and also just a clarification. I think this is also often good to say when talking about church discipline, is that church discipline is not just for sexual sin issues. It can feel like on a practical level that it's often that kind of thing. But, Titus talks about church discipline over someone who is divisive. And so church discipline is kind of like the
swindling people.
Yeah.
So
that the kind of the public, if I'm saying this right, kind of church discipline is kind of the public, visible, unrepentant sin that affects other people. Like that's, yeah.
Okay. Other comments on that? No?
that one was an easy one.
Okay. And also, you're saying that does apply also to heterosexual stuff as well. This is not because it's a homosexual sin that you're acting upon. This is because it's a sexual sin.
That would just be one of many categories that could fall under that.
And so for this individual person in this situation, maybe the first step is have they confronted that person about this in the first place And if they have continually, maybe the next step in obviously the Matthew process is bringing in another into that process. And then if it's gone past that, then bring it to leadership in that process. So it's following that Matthew
18,
piece
yeah.
in that process first before just saying like, well, I know they did this, go to the church. Like, no,
Yeah, so it's not automatic, you messed up in this way, you acted upon the
one
sin,
strike and
we
you're
need
out.
to go do something about this person. It really is more about the appeal to try to turn that person away
Yes.
from that sin, the
Yeah,
acting of
exactly.
that
And
sin.
that's the heart of church discipline, is to bring them to
Right.
point them back to Jesus, to point them back into a fruitful,
Yeah.
faithful relationship with Jesus in the process.
So there's time and effort put into that. This isn't like
Absolutely,
a
yes.
turn on a dime, the decision is
Yes.
made, you've done the thing, and now it's over. It's not that. This
Yeah.
is a pleading with you.
I think at least in this church context, if we get to the point of church discipline, I want to feel like we've done everything possible and tried every way we could possibly try to resolve this some other way.
So I just want to clarify that because obviously we're going to head more in the church body, interactions around this stuff type of conversation now. But if we're saying on one hand we want people to be able to speak freely about this as believers that admit their wrestlings, if you think that, an impending church disciplinary harsh action is looming over you if you admit this to anyone, you are probably not going to be very likely to want to share that this is something that's difficult for you.
Yeah, and that's why
I was
it's really,
sharing in church membership interview not long ago how in my 8 years I've been here between a member and on the staff, I think we've had 2 to 3 church discipline cases. So it's just not a common, happens all the time thing.
Yeah.
and I don't think that's because we're lax in it. I think it's because we're, appealing on the basis of grace. But yeah, and I think this, again, is important to clarify the difference between temptation and struggle. That's not sin. And so, and even sin where that you're fighting against and falling back into it and repenting and working and trying to follow Jesus, because that's all of us. That's not like a church discipline thing either. And so those are the kind of things that the cross is safe for sinners who hate their sin. This is a safe place for sinners.
Or just the cross, the church.
Yeah, the church. This church, it should be a safe place for sinners who are trying to lay down their sin. Where the holiness of God becomes not a safe place for sinners is where I want my sin more than I want Jesus, and I don't care about what Jesus
So
thinks.
this
about
is now
and I just-
blatant rebellion
Yeah,
you're talking
and
about.
that's different.
Okay. All right. So along the same line of thought, talking about church stuff, for people that are worried about bringing or inviting their gay or LGBTQ plus whatever, you're classifying as friends or family members to church because they are not sure how the body is going to interact with them, respond to them, care for them, just how they would be received, not just coming into the space, but how they're going to get treated really relationally, I think is more the question here. Well, there's 2 pieces to this. How would you respond to that person who's struggling with wanting to bring them in because there's fear about how this is going to play out? And also, how should the church body treat and respond to people who are either identifying in this way or living in this way? Because there are some that identify but aren't active in it, so I want to clarify that. Either one of those. If they were to come in, how are we supposed to respond if we want to respond in love, but we also recognize that there is a scriptural misalignment here that's probably at some point going to come up?
Yeah, I think 2 pieces. The first would be speaking to our church body. I'll steal your line. Keep the first thing first and focus. Jesus is the center, not their sexuality. So I'll steal a line for you so you don't have to say it again.
Thanks.
So that to me would be the main thing. Is it's when you have someone new you're meeting, you don't need to dive in every area of their life, how they're not following Jesus. Like, we can't expect people who don't know Jesus to act like Christians. And so keep the main thing. Focus on the first thing first. Let's talk about Jesus with them and talk about their relationship with Jesus. That's what matters, their heart. And then thinking about if you're bringing a friend, my main piece there would be don't say no for someone. Don't be the barrier for them to possibly know Jesus.
That's good.
When that's your ultimate goal anyway, is to help them know Jesus. And so the worst thing they can say is, no, I don't want to come. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But
like,
don't say
how
no
do
for
you,
them.
if they're feeling like I want to bring them, but I almost feel like I need to warn them that someone could respond, blah, blah, blah. Because I'm just thinking of situations where I've talked through this very scenario with people, where they were talking to people, they were like, hey, I would come to your church, but I'm not sure how I'd be received. And they're actually asking that question. Yeah. How will I be received if I come into your church?
And that to me is an important distinction between, is it your own fear, or is this actually a conversation you have with somebody? Because it's your own fear, it's one thing to deal with. If it's somebody you're actually in conversation with, you can go two ways, I think. And I think probably varied over the course of time. Do you warn someone ahead of time, or do you have the conversation after the fact and say, hey, what did you experience here? What was your thoughts? And let's talk through those things, and pointing back to Scripture in that process, pointing back to Jesus in the process. Because at the end of the day, we're a church, we're Christians, that we're filled with a bunch of sinners here. There's going to be an offense at some point in time. It's going to happen. So how to respond to that at any point in that process?
Yeah, I think this question I think gets to something Brendan shared in his message, that I think as Christians, we can elevate this area in a way that it becomes really bigger than other sins. But if you think about it, the homosexual or gay person who comes to visit church on Sunday is no different than any other unbeliever. We're all coming with our sin baggage, that God would condemn us for. Homosexuality is no better or worse than any of whether I'm a liar, whether I'm, have cheated on my wife, whether I'm, heterosexually immoral. So we don't make that the main issue when other people come as the first thing, about. I would hope people would say, I've told lies. How will I be treated if I come to your church?
Well, I think just to respond to that, because I've actually thought about this question, because I've wondered to myself, why is it that Christians feel like they have to respond to this in a way that we don't feel like we have to respond to other sins? Because obviously, if you have someone who walks in and they're, dating somebody and they're sleeping with them, but they're not married, that's still in the classifiers of what they probably should be doing here biblically. But the difference, I think, is they are not going to walk in here and put that forward as a primary identity thing in front of everyone's face necessarily. They're not going to walk in and say, hey, I'm so-and-so and I'm sleeping with my girlfriend or my boyfriend, right? They're not going to do that. So what makes this issue, I think, somewhat unique, I think there's a way Christians feel the pressure here, and I think might be what it is. We feel the pressure to respond to this in-your-face identifying push where it's, I walk in and the first thing you need to know about me is that I am gay or LGBTQ+.
And even if someone's not being pushy about it, the reality, like if they come in holding hands with their same-sex partner, like it's okay.
That's not
here.
even
It's like, okay.
what I would call being pushy, but I mean, like, some of it is some of the lifestyle and the way that it seems to play out is people want you to know. They want you to know that this is who they are. I mean, this out and proud idea, right? That's kind of what it is. It's that it's in your face that you know this about me and that this is a major piece of who I am. And by putting it in people's faces, you are feeling, I think, a little bit more forcibly confronted by this in a way that you feel pressed to respond. And it's not that I think it's actually different. I don't know that it is, and I would agree with you guys on that. But when someone's that forceful, and I would question if we had other sins where people were like, boom, and this is who I am, and they would come in like that, I would wonder if that same discomfort would start to creep up in people where it's, I feel forced to respond to this because it's being thrown up into my face as like part of who you are. Now, again, we talked about earlier, not playing the game. You don't have to play that game, even if that's true. I think you can choose to step outside of that and say, I'm not going to relate to you where that's the primary thing we're going to deal with. I'm going to treat you like a human being, which is a lot more fully encompassed than just this area of your life. But I think that is the struggle, I think, for Christians. When someone comes into the church and it's like, boom, I'm leading with my sexual foot, if you will. That's what you need to know first. This is what's coming. Then it is awkward, I think. And I think we should admit that is a little uncomfortable. There is something a little unnatural maybe about that being the primary identifier of a person, but not because it's gay. I think it's because the misalignment might be the awkwardness that we feel there. That is out of proportion, drastically. And I think it might be good to distinguish that as we wrestle with, well, do I need to confront it? How do I respond? Some of what you feel, I think, is the unnaturalness of that. And I think you might want to fight through that to figure out how to treat someone as a person.
Yeah.
But what are your guys'
thoughts? If the question in your heart is, do I need to confront this? The answer is no. Let
Right.
Jesus do that.
Right.
Yeah, I think I still want to try to see people, lost people as sheep without a shepherd.
Yep.
That you're here because you don't have a shepherd to guide you in the right paths of life, the good paths of life. And you've made the choices that you thought made sense to you, but without a shepherd, you're lost, you're blind, you don't see. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to condemn you for that. You need a savior, and so I want to try to keep the locus there. And like I say, I think we've said this before, if you can enter into a relationship with Jesus, let's see what he does with some of this other stuff.
So is it okay to not confront all of that stuff? Maybe you don't bring it up. Maybe you're aware of it and you just kind of go, I'm going to let that be for now and see what God does as I continue to get to know you and love you and invite you to things and let you be a part of this.
Well,
is there a point at which they're being brought in so much that there is a challenge that might need to be issued? Maybe there isn't.
Yes.
In the right order of things, I think, is the issue. Because
Okay.
if the challenge is, you need to change this aspect of your life, but you don't have a savior to give you the power and grace to even do that, then I think we're putting the cart before the horse.
I see.
Where we're back to expecting unbelievers to live like believers, and why would we do that?
Yeah.
Did we do that when we were unbelievers? I mean, I didn't. And so, again, let's make sure we identify the problem correctly. The problem is you don't have a relationship with a good shepherd who can help guide and lead your life. It's not about you cleaning it up from this or any other thing, to meet him. It's about you need to meet him so he can help you walk through life in a way that is fulfilling and good and right in the way God intended your life to be.
Well, and think about this scenario. I can imagine we almost think, is it okay if somebody's walking up, we see that, we're like, oh, do we need to confront them? If we see someone yell at their kid in the parking lot, do we feel like we need to confront them on that one? Like, it's like, no, let Jesus work in their heart and let Jesus do that thing. And there might be a place, like a ongoing relationship where you have an opportunity to talk those things, not putting the cart before the horse. But if you're welcoming a brand new person and you saw them yell at their kid in the parking lot, I'm not going to say, hey, you shouldn't do that. Like,
This is church.
yeah.
Yeah, so even if that person came in and asked me and said, well, what do you think about me being gay?
Yeah.
I think the first thing I would say is, the real issue isn't about you being gay. The real issue is that you, like every other person in this room, is a sinner who needs a savior. And our sins may vary from one person to the next, but the bottom line is you're just like every one of the rest of us.
And so you have come to the right place.
Yeah, and this place is full of people who have found a relationship with Jesus that has changed their life, and that's available to you too.
Yeah. So for the Christian that's concerned that by not addressing it, that somehow they're leaving an opening for someone to think that they can have their cake and eat it too, where they can continue sinning and doing and living this way, but also that they're welcome to come in and have God, because we are not making that clear. Is that a legitimate concern?
So maybe I want to come at the question from a little bit of a different angle to think through this, because there is a difference between the welcoming someone at the door and how that translates into the life of the church. Because I do think one of the things our church does really well is we're really welcoming on Sunday. And so I would say if you're thinking about, because part of the question was, what should I expect if I bring my gay friend?
Yes.
And so I think that what you should expect, and I think what you would find, is a really welcoming environment for them, and people be like, "I'm so glad you're here." And if that person was like, "I'm gay," I think they'd still hear, "I'm so glad you're here." Like I think we do a good job at that on Sunday mornings. The reality is that we want to see unbelievers, all sort kind of unbelievers, transition from a visiting on Sunday morning to being brought into a relationship and community. And so any unbeliever walking through the door, I think, should expect to be welcomed, should be, we're so glad you're here. I certainly hope, we're inviting them over to our house for lunch. You're getting to know them. You're like, hey, come visit my small group, whatever. There's lots of ways that can happen. But at some point, every unbeliever, homosexual, heterosexual, whatever, should find in that being brought into this community that they are on the outside looking in. And that this community is built around something with Jesus at the center that they don't have. And so that's going to be a messy transition. Hopefully it can be a grace-filled transition. But that will eventually lead to a fork in the road of either these people have something that I don't have and I don't want it, and so I'm out, or these people have something I don't have and I do want it. And so whether that's...
And that leads to implications in our life of how it lives.
Yeah, and so again, Jesus is the center. First things first, I want to see heterosexual and homosexual sinners get to that point in the life of the church and come to say, am I going to follow Jesus or not?
Yeah, and in a sense, our job is, and every person who's a part of this church family's job is to help show them what that is that we have in a way that they could see it and hopefully want it. Yeah. Because we've shown it to them accurately.
Yeah. So what is, as for this church body and any other church body that may exist that's trying to, honor God in how we handle welcoming people in this area as people come in? Because honestly, the more prevalent certain sin trends and different things are, the more commonly you're going to have somebody come in eventually that's their background, either actively or was. And if the gospel's big enough for all people, then there has to be a way and a good thing that they come into these doors and hear about Jesus and find a place here.
And such were some of you.
Yeah, so if that's true, then what would you say directionally to the church body of how to orient themselves towards how to handle themselves with that kind of thing? Beyond just the greeting at the door, because I think that is something that may happen 1 week, 2 weeks, and the person may not come back. That's kind of, in some ways, it can be the temporal. But once someone's brought further and further in, or we need to kind of decide if we're going to bring someone from just the greeting at the door kind of in as we try to do that, what is the best way to go about doing that and how to think through that? Is it any different than bringing in any other person? Is there any cautions or things you would want to consider, or what's the best way to approach?
So one of the things that we've said a couple times is, looking at the example, trying to learn from the life of Jesus, and I think seeing his interaction with the Samaritan woman at the well is, I think, really helpful here, and specifically with this issue of homosexuality, but really with any kind of any sinner. Because if you watch what his conversation is, he starts drawing her out in a disarming way. He asks for help, and she's like, "What are you asking me for help?" He's humbling himself, he's being winsome and inviting her in, and then he starts asking some questions that expose kind of what's going on. And the moment she starts feeling uncomfortable about that, what she does is she deflects to a hot button culture war issue. Because she starts feeling the heat from him talking about her sex life, and she's like, well, but you Jews say that you're supposed to worship in Jerusalem, and we say, what do you think about that? Which is just total deflection, because she's uncomfortable and is trying to just hey, what do you think about this? Which is that's classic. That's someone comes in and they start feeling the conviction of the gospel. They're like, well, what do you think about gay marriage? And you want to be like, well, what does that have to do with anything? But the way that Jesus answers her question, but in a way that just draws the conversation right back to him and to her heart. So she's like, well, what do you think about this worship thing that divides us? And he's like, he's like, well, Samaritans, you're wrong. Salvation's from the Jews, but this father's now seeking worshipers in spirit and in truth. And so come, like, be that kind of worshiper. And like, boom, he's right back at her heart. And so I think like that takes skill. I'm not Jesus, but if we can start to develop that kind of way of, in all my evangelistic conversations, if Jesus is the center, my goal should be to redirect every issue back to him. And so in those scenarios where if, somebody's being pushy about this, if someone's bringing this up to you, to think through, okay, how, like, my goal here is back to Jesus, as fast as I can back to the gospel.
Yeah, and I think in my experience, just in my own life, I think as from the time I got saved, there were things that it was like God had a plan for things he wanted to address in my life. He didn't drop everything on me the first moment I got saved, but there were things that he began to address in my life. There were other things that he didn't touch for a while, but then later began when some of those other things were kind of addressed. So God has kind of a plan for how he works through the reality of, the brokenness and sinfulness of our life. And I think sometimes we want to kind of step in and take that over.
We want to be the Holy Spirit.
Yeah, and I think that I've just learned to kind of trust that if God's at work in a person's life, if they come into a relationship with him, if the Spirit comes and dwells within them, there's going to be an effect of that. It may not be as quick as we might think it should sometimes, but God is at work, and sometimes, we can become a means of that grace to help people see things biblically, help them understand what Scripture says about things, but in a way that lets the Spirit kind of do that work in their heart.
Yeah, and so those two core issues there are trust and humility. Do I trust that God can actually handle this and that I don't need to step in and micromanage the outcome? And also the humility, because I think so often when we're wanting things to move along faster and everyone to clean up their own issues, we're really wanting people's sanctification to move at a lot faster pace than ours does. and I think we fail to realize just how patient God has been with us, and just how much junk there's still left in my life when I'm demanding that you clean up your act right now.
Yeah. So really, bottom line, you don't need to run around concerned about addressing something as a fellow church member or someone who's coming in here. You don't need to overly concern yourself with calling out this particular sin, or any other sin for that matter. Like maybe there is a place for conviction and conversation around relationship at points.
Can I clarify to make sure we're understanding?
Yes, that's what I'm trying to do.
In the family of the church, we do have a responsibility to one another in the relational context that we have, not to like call people out, but to address, to go to one another, because that's part of being a hospital for sinners, is that we all need that help, and we need each other to do that in our lives. What we're talking about here is the outsider coming into this community. What should they expect? So I just want to make sure we clarify that.
Okay. So you're talking about not someone who's a regular attender.
So someone who's
I'm not trying to over nitpick, but like there's a difference between someone who's visiting, checking us out, someone who's a regular attender but not a member, someone who maybe they're a regular attender but they're not sure that they're saved, things like that. They kind of adjust some of where someone's at.
Everyone's on a different place in that journey, in their walk with Jesus, and we want to help meet people where they are and help them take the next step. And so if that's the person coming in the front door, we're welcoming them. If that's the person who's been coming for a while and they're getting involved in relationship here, we want to help them see that this community is built on Jesus, and that's the next step. But if you're part of this church family and you profess Christ, then we have a responsibility to one another to help hold each other accountable and help each other defeat sin in our lives.
And super overgenerally speaking here, generally those types of conversations where you're talking about conviction of sin, whatever else, and calling each other out, those generally are not happening in a random conversation in the seats on Sunday morning. Those are more often happening in things like small groups and ongoing accountability type conversations, those type of situations. Generally, I'm saying.
I mean,
'cause,
we're
you know,
not supposed to
Yeah, yeah.
confront people loudly about their sin in colonnade.
There's a big
obviously,
echo.
obviously there is conviction that happens Sunday morning, especially hearing God's word. God's going to do his thing. There's a reason why we have things like ministry times, but generally speaking, in the conversations between people on a Sunday morning, those things aren't things that are happening.
Okay. And that's okay.
Yeah, for
Okay.
sure.
All right. Last question. This is a follow-up question
Last
to
question.
what we were. This is the last one.
We made it, guys.
I know.
This is turning
have-
into the Grace at the Table conference.
I know, we have arrived. So, in regards to, I think, partially the comment that I was making earlier about leading with your sexual foot. So, back to there, if you can bookmark
Which,
that.
can I just say, that's a weird phrase? And
It is, and I'm sorry for that, but that's what you get when you're dealing with me. You lead with your
Picturing
best
that
foot, now you have a sexual foot. Sorry about that.
Unless you're a clam.
Don't ruin this. Don't make it worse.
Oh, my.
We're going to move on.
We've been
The
doing this a long
question is, could it be a good idea to immediately put your sexual or other sins forward if someone leads with homosexuality as their identity? Then you can go immediately to Jesus is better and has given me a new identity. I don't know if that would be more offensive, but I do agree that when someone puts a sin in your face and claims it is good, you have to respond.
Yeah.
So what would you say
I
to
can
that?
give kind of an example of how I've tried to navigate this in the kind of this Samaritan woman Jesus thing. And so I don't know if this is effective. I guess, but you know, people ask me, okay, so I'm gay. What do you think the Bible says about that? And so I'm like, okay, how do I get this conversation back to Jesus and the gospel? So the way I've tried to do that is to say, well, I think the Bible's really clear that all of us are, you know, that God's design for our sexuality has been broken in all of us, and that God calls us to live a certain way, and that homosexuality would be sinful according to the Bible. But listen, the thing is, sorry, right to, but the thing is, I'm a heterosexual sinner, and Jesus has saved me, and I know if he can save someone like me with all of my mess and all of my baggage, that you're not any different than that, and like boomer back at the gospel. So I try to do that, like that right there, that like I've literally said that to people. That's like 15 seconds back to the gospel. Where it goes from there, I don't know.
Well, I think part of it too is, okay, so what are you meaning by saying they put a sexual foot forward? Is that someone who walks up and said, hey, I'm gay? Or is it someone who's like walked in holding someone's hand? If someone's walking in holding someone's hand, you don't have to go up to them, you know how I've sinned? Like, so it's like, it's in proper context. Like, you're not saying like, hey, just because someone walked in with a flag on their t-shirt, you have to walk up to them like, you know all the ways I've screwed up? Like, it's not, come on, think normally.
Yeah,
act
that's
human.
weird.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't be weird.
Yeah.
Don't make this worse for our reputation as believers
Yeah.
than it already is.
Yeah.
People already think
Don't
we're
use
strange.
phrases like sexual foot.
Okay, guys.
But I would like to take a moment to go back. I think there's one question that keeps coming to my head that I don't think we fully
No,
answered
that was supposed to be the last
I know,
question.
I'm sorry. But there's a conversation you said, you talked about a friend comes to you and asks, like, they had a fear of how the church would treat them when they walked in. Mm-hmm. I want to go back to navigating that conversation because I don't think we actually addressed that very much at all. Of how do you talk to your friend if they have this fear, they want to come to church, but they don't know how they're going to be responded to.
Are you addressing the person who has the friend, or are you addressing how?
That conversation between you are the friend and your friend is
Okay.
gay, that they want to come to church with you.
Okay.
That conversation, because I think that is a very awesome opportunity to just have that conversation with them.
So just for clarity
Yeah.
purpose, so the issue is you're the Christian who's concerned about how their gay
No, so your gay friend comes to
will
you.
be treated.
Your gay friend comes to you and says, "Hey, I want to come to church with you. How are people going to receive me?" That conversation.
Because I think there's another level of this
Yeah.
that may be addressed to, and that is
We're never
how
gonna
the
leave.
Christian
Yes.
who's afraid of
Yes.
inviting their friend will
Yes.
be treated.
Because
Yes.
some of
So-
those
so it's
fears
not-
may not be legitimately founded. They
Yes.
could be speculative fears.
Exactly. That's part of my point. Is I want to have that conversation through with them, talking through like, okay, what are your fears? Why are those fears there? And pointing them to the gospel even then, because whether they don't know Jesus, and you have an opportunity to then potentially share the gospel with them, or if they do know Jesus, and maybe we don't even know, maybe they have these different same-sex attraction thoughts, but they're not. They want to get out of that. Those conversations is very vital and unique opportunities where they're very vulnerable in that process.
And I guess in one sense, you have to take the risk that
Yeah.
your church family is going to kind of back you up and respond in a good, gracious way, which I certainly hope as a church we would do.
And I think
when we've had
especially
gay
in that
people come.
welcoming
Yeah.
kind of Sunday morning, I really do think that we're really good at that.
Yeah.
And I think I would say, so if I'm inviting that friend and I'm worried about, okay, what's their experience going to be? I want to be smart about this. I'm going to text my other church friends and be like, hey, I'm bringing so and so. Can we sit with you? Can we hang out with you? Can we go with that to lunch after? I'm going to try to manage this to make it a good experience.
And let's be honest, don't we have the same concern when we're just bringing any unbeliever?
This is true.
You know, what is their experience going to be? Because we recognize that they're not in the same place everybody else is. They're coming in as an outsider, and, you know, how can we help them not feel like an outsider? And I think generally as a church we do pretty good at that, at least what I've seen.
Well, the only thing I think I add too is when I have this conversation with that person, like I want to reassure them that, hey, no matter how someone else responds, they respond great or horribly, I got your back. I'm with you. We're in this together, this process. I'm not going to leave you out to hang out dry, but I'm going to walk through this with you, and at the end of the day, point them back to Jesus in that process. That's what really matters.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I would maybe just say, you know, if you're bringing somebody, whether they're gay or just somebody else, and you're concerned about how, you know, that experience is going to be for them, give one of us a call. Give us a heads up ahead of time. Tell them you're bringing a guest. You'd like one of me or one of the other guys to talk with them and bring them up, you know, have them meet us. And
then you message me and I'm like, oh, hey, just so you know, I'm preaching a message on homosexuality this Sunday. Is this the week that you want to bring them? Maybe, but maybe not.
Because, I mean, I think I can speak for all of us. We would love to do whatever we can to make that first person feel comfortable and welcome here.
Yeah. So speaking to the person who has concerns about bringing their friend, just bottom line, I'm going to simplify that question. Is it legitimate and acceptable for you to let your fears of the what ifs of happens when you bring that person in here be a good enough excuse for you to not invite somebody or not bring somebody to church, especially if they're expressing some interest?
Yeah, where you were like, don't, like, because if it's your fear keeping you from inviting them, then you're the barrier between them and Jesus. And that was an oof.
Yeah, to me, it's one of those things where it's no, because you don't want to say no for them. At the end of the day, let God do what He wants in their hearts. That's where I'd more and more. I think probably back in the day, I probably would have tried to warn people. The other day, I'm like, let God do what He wants in the experience, rather than
let God be bigger than what you think can
rather
happen.
than almost like pre-tainting them to certain aspects.
Yeah.
It's like, let God do what He wants, and if they have a conversation afterwards, great. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about your experience, and if there is things that they saw that maybe you'd agree with, then talk with us.
Yeah, and just as when I got saved and I came out of a very sinful lifestyle, if you named it, I did it probably hundreds of times in my first 30 years of my life. But when I got saved and God was beginning to work in my life, I can tell you, if I had come to a church and people had confronted me on some of the stuff going on in my life, and this did happen in one case, the first church we visited, the person that kind of invited us there made a comment afterwards and said, well, you know, if they'd known this about you, they probably would have said something. We never went back.
And this was like you were a believer at this point.
Yeah,
right?
I had just become a believer, but my life still had all kinds of stuff in it that God needed to deal with, and He did deal with it over time. But if that had been the way people had responded to me, that would have been a turn off to me, and I don't think I'd have been back, even as a young believer.
All right. Well, I just want to go back just to make sure we got the last question, because we went a different way. So could it be a good idea to immediately put your sexual or other sins forward if someone leads with their homosexuality as their identity? Good or bad idea?
Yes,
because we didn't quite address that.
So I think that there's maybe a helpful and not helpful way to say that, because I think sometimes if we're not careful, the way we talk about that, people can be like, think that we're equating their sins with some other horrible things. And like
Yeah.
that's not what I mean. But I think you can answer, like if you answer their question that like, yes, the Bible says this is sinful, but Jesus saves all kinds of sinners like me. That's probably a better way to do it than to be like, well, yeah, adultery and polygamy and bestiality, and they're like, what do you think of me?
Yeah.
Even though that's not what you meant to say, like that's how they're going to hear it.
Yeah. Agreed. Or it could come across a little bit maybe flippant to some degree, where it's like, well, I'm a liar, so we're all in good company. It's like, well, it's not quite the same.
I think the distinction is there. If I'm communicating that there has been a grace of God that has met me in my life, that maybe that can be a helpful thing to communicate. Yeah. If I'm trying to communicate my sin in such a way that it's, how would I say it, that it's trying to make yours seem okay, that's probably not a helpful.
Or even just the equating of sins in general. I don't know if that's really the game that you want to play, because that's really not the point.
That's not the point. Get
of
it
what
to
you
grace.
guys are
Get it to
talking
the
about.
gospel.
Yeah. So maybe broadly, well, everyone in here is a sinner. Maybe that kind of addressing, or everyone in here, struggles with something or deals with different things, and we all mess up. Those kinds of generic speak might be more safe to go to, but you don't probably want to get into a naming and listing your individual sins for you and others.
You think you've done this? Let me tell you what I've done.
Yeah, this isn't the let me one-up you with my sins game, because that probably won't end very well, because everyone has different feelings about those sins, and that's just going to get weird, strange, and
But
strange.
I think
very
the
quick.
heart of, look, I want you to realize you're just like everybody else here. You're no different. You're unique in that you're your own individual person with your own individual issues, but you're in the same boat that every one of us in this room.
And not too lost or too far gone that you can't come in here. So, all right, cool.
Well,
Do you
I think
have a
just
closing
a
thought?
couple of thoughts, yeah.
Do you really? Okay.
Well,
I was
not
kidding.
kind of more thoughts.
He
No,
couldn't
I just
possibly
want
have
to
more to say.
reiterate there's some great authors out there that have done a lot of the work in this area. So there is great books like Sam Alberry is a fantastic author. Is God Anti-Gay is a fantastic resource. Rosaria Butterfield I mentioned earlier, she's got a great book, Secret Thoughts of Unlike a Convert. There's other books, The Secular Creed by Rebecca McLaughlin. You mentioned Embodied by Preston Sprinkle.
And then dealing specifically with transgender issues.
Yeah, and then there's
Which we did
there's
not
another
get
author.
into today, but perhaps another day.
There's two other authors I know that write in this area that I think are really helpful, that are gospel-centered, and Rachel Gilson and Jackie Hill Perry do some good stuff in this area as well. So I'd highly recommend.
Is there any way we can post those?
I can put them in the
some of
comments.
those resources.
Yeah, I'll put them in the comments for sure,
Did you? Okay.
or in the description of the video. But yeah, there's some great resources out there that deal in this area that dive in more and really have very real-world experience with these issues. So definitely look those up, check them out. And then next month, our topic is singleness. So join us next month for that episode as we dive more into singleness as well. So it's a pleasure being up here with you guys. It's been a good time.
And if you have questions, comments, anything you want to let us know, or even want to further the conversation, well, you can ask Eric. You can either ask these guys when you see them, or you can reach out to us by email at resources@gracecommunity.com, because we would love to hear from you guys. .org. Resources@gracecommunity.org. I always spell that up. So please let us know if you have other questions or even topic suggestions, things we didn't cover that you want us to discuss, let us know. So thanks for joining us.